In the remote forests of Washington state, a young man tracks and kills a deer. Children of various ages, smeared with black soot, emerge from the forest accompanied by their father, Ben Cash, who announces,
"Today the boy is dead, and in his place is a man."
He then feeds the hunter the liver of the freshly killed animal. The children look proudly at their brother and then joyfully splash in the clear waters of a forest stream, washing off their camouflage. Later they carry the animal's carcass to their home, nestled deep in the forest. Nearby there's a greenhouse and outbuildings for storage, with a garden surrounding them. Inside everything is tidy and organized, with each forest home resident diligently performing their tasks. Later they gather in a clearing where, after meditation, the father teaches the children self-defense techniques.
You kill her.
Yeah, thank you. Let's try that.
In the evening, the family gathers around a campfire where the children read world classics and scientific literature. The father questions each child about the material, helping them understand everything from advanced mathematics to literary styles, and gives them assignments for the next day. Then he takes out a guitar. Everyone brings their instrument, and soon an improvised melody plays by the campfire, under which the children dance. In the morning, the family goes for their mandatory run along forest trails. Everything seems to follow a well-established routine. Later, the father and his eldest son, Bo, return from a trip to the nearest town for supplies. Unexpectedly, the younger children ask,
"Why does Mommy have to be gone so long?"
She hasn't been gone very long.
It turns out their mother is in a hospital, and the father is going to find out when she can return home. In town, while Ben shops, local girls flirt with Bo. However, he doesn't know what to talk about with them, as his knowledge of political structures doesn't interest them much. So Bo goes to get the mail and finds several letters addressed to him, inviting him to the country's best universities. Meanwhile, Ben reaches his sister, who informs him that his wife Leslie has taken her own life. Returning home, he sits under a forest waterfall for a long time before coming out to the children to announce the tragic news.
Last night, Mommy killed herself.
While everyone weeps, Ben's middle son, Relian, grabs a knife and tries to attack his father, but then directs his blows at a tree, venting his anger. Later, Ben reads his wife's found will, amazed by it. But morning comes, and the family again runs along the forest trail and exercises in the clearing. Suddenly, Relian asks,
"Dad, when's Mom's funeral?"
Ben returns to town and contacts his wife's parents, who blame everything on their former son-in-law, even though they chose this life together. When Leslie got sick, her parents found and paid for the clinic, but nothing helped.
I found her will.
You are not welcome here. I will have you arrested.
However, Leslie's mother informs him that the burial will take place in 5 days. Later, the family discusses what happened. The children understand their grandparents' anger, but cannot allow their mother's will to be disregarded. However, the threat of their father being arrested and them being sent to an orphanage scares them. At night, Ben hears his wife's voice.
What we're doing out here is so incredible. I love you so much.
In the morning, Ben finds all 6 children ready in the yard, wanting to see their mother one last time. He strongly opposes the trip, but the children insist.
Dad, give us the mission.
Mission! Rescue Mom!
But Ben reminds them of the upcoming training. Struggling, Relian falls off the cliff and injures his arm, but the father reminds him,
"No one will magically appear and save you in the end."
The children persistently conquer the difficult peak as it starts to rain. Later, they rest at the base of the cliff. On the way home, the father suddenly stops the bus and admits that they cannot go to their mother's funeral because they cannot argue with her relatives. But suddenly, Ben stops his speech and turns on the music.
They set off
into the big world in their converted bus. Along the way, Ben gives the children a unique tour, showing them America's sights.
Attention all campers. This is your captain speak.
Later, Ben orders them to search for any game for dinner.
Everyone keep their eyes peeled for deer.
Finding nothing suitable, the family stops for the night. In the morning, they arrive at a bank, and while Ben withdraws money, the children look around in surprise.
What's wrong with everyone?
Are they sick?
Convincing the children that laughing at people is wrong, Ben tells them to return to the bus. Soon, a police officer stops them and asks for documents. Checking the license, he inquires,
"No school today."
and goes to inspect the bus. The situation is saved by Bo, who starts reading religious texts and says they are homeschooled. The children sing hymns and the officer hurries away. The bus continues on, but soon they stop to hunt for food. However, the children cannot shoot at domestic animals. The bus drives on. Suddenly, the children start crying, remembering their mother. The girls speak to each other in Esperanto, which angers their father.
No Esperanto. I'm not joking.
The children start communicating in world languages. Soon, Ben has to stop at a cafe, but the menu confuses her.
Cola.
Poison water.
Realizing there is no proper food here, Ben orders the children to leave. He goes to a supermarket and fills the cart with groceries. Suddenly, he grabs his chest and falls to the floor. While concerned shoppers try to help him, the children steal the groceries. Ben regains consciousness and leaves the store. Driving a bit further, the father reviews their actions, and the children analyze the mistakes made during the theft in detail. Finally, Ben presents a stolen cake, as today is the birthday of scientist Chomsky.
Uncle, no, it's the day of your birthday.
After the treat, the father gives all the children useful gifts: a bow, knives, a book on sex education, and arrows. But this angers Relian.
Why can't we celebrate Christmas like the rest of the entire world?
The father doesn't understand why a mythical elf is more useful than a thinker and humanist. He offers his son to share his thoughts and convince him of the correctness of his reasoning. But the boy leaves. The family moves on. Soon they reach Ben's sister Harper's house. The woman is happy to see all her nephews, but their questions surprise her.
How did you kill those chickens? With an axe or a knife?
She tries to find answers and is again astonished that Ben honestly and thoroughly explains even very delicate matters to the children. Harper's husband tries to offer condolences, but Ben calmly reminds him that he couldn't stand his wife. Then he straightforwardly explains the cause of his wife's death. His sister and her husband try to end the conversation. Children shouldn't know the details, but Ben tells the children the real cause of their mother's death.
Probably a form of postpartum psychosis.
Ignoring his sister, who left the table, he pours wine for the children. Later, the children watch with curiosity as their cousins play video games. Ben argues with his sister, who cannot accept such democracy in parenting.
I tell the truth to my kids. I don't lie to my kids.
Protecting children.
Harper believes that not sharing what children cannot understand isn't a lie. Her husband suggests postponing the conversation until morning, and Ben apologizes. Meanwhile, the children take their sleeping bags and set up for the night in the yard, despite having rooms prepared for them. In the morning, everyone gathers at the table, and Ben allows the children to play video games with their cousins. When the children leave, his sister and her husband try to reason with
Kids need structure. They need to go to a real school.
Then Ben calls his nephews and asks them questions about political science and history. The boys can't answer a single question. However, Ben's youngest daughter freely discusses these topics. Relatives are impressed by such knowledge and no longer object to Ben's way of educating his children. The family moves on. They soon stop to rest at a campground where Bo meets a girl. She is surprised by his unusual name, and he explains that his parents made it up.
I'm Claire.
Bodovan. Our names are unique. There's only one of us in the whole world.
In the evening, they continue their acquaintance. The girl is surprised that Bo doesn't know modern pop music but loves Bach and cello suites. He lies that they recently lived in Paris and is amazed at her ignorance. He avoids questions about his mother and, after kissing the girl for the first time, declares his intention to marry her to her mother.
I am ready for you, if you will have me. Will you be my wife?
The mother leads the girl back to the trailer. In the morning, the bus pulls out of the parking lot and Bo waves to the girl and her mother. That day, they reach the church where Leslie's farewell ceremony is held. Relatives and friends mourn the woman when a group in bright clothes enters the church, stunning everyone. The preacher tells about Leslie, and when he mentions her husband, Ben takes the floor and reads his wife's will.
First of all, Leslie practiced Buddhism. If nothing else, she had a sense of humor. Leslie's last will and testament.
Finally, she asks to have her ashes flushed down the nearest toilet. Enraged, Leslie's father Jack orders Ben to be thrown out of the church. The children run after him while the preacher continues his sermon. Soon, Leslie's coffin is carried outside. Grandma and Grandpa hug the grandchildren, some of whom they see for the first time. Nevertheless, Jack forbids Ben to go to the cemetery, threatening arrest. Ben orders the children to get in the bus and follows the procession, though the children beg him to stop.
No, I don't want to lose you!
Hearing the last argument, Ben stops the bus. They drive to the suburbs and stop for the night. The man opens a bottle of wine and drinks it, sitting by the bus while his sons go to a sports field and remember their mother. Unexpectedly, Relian declares,
Mom had psychotic episodes. Dad made her crazy. Dad's dangerous.
Upset, Bo returns to Ben and shows him letters from all the universities in America, offering to accept him for study. Suddenly, the father accuses him of lying and secrecy, and Bo confesses, "It was Mom. I just want to go to college." Ben is stunned, knowing his son speaks 6 languages, advanced mathematics, and physics. What else can he be taught? But the son becomes furious.
I don't know anything about anything!
Later, he receives a note from his youngest son, who ran away to live with his grandparents. Seeing his father come for him, Relian accuses him of killing his mother.
You killed Mom! I heard you fighting about where we live. Mom wanted to leave.
Ben tries to prove to his son that they made the decision together with Leslie, but the boy is determined to stay with his grandparents. Ben orders him to pack, but the boy shouts insults and runs away. Ben follows, but an arrow lands right next to him. This is Jack stopping his son-in-law.
They're going to be totally unprepared for the real world.
Jack intends to file for custody of the children. Ben refuses to leave without his son, and then Jack calls the police. Ben has to leave. Later, he and the children hide in the dark, watching the grandfather's house. Then they send Vesper to rescue the captive. Unexpectedly, the daughter falls from the roof and crashes. A shocked Ben can't believe it happened. The girl is taken to the hospital. A vertebra is fractured. The doctor is very impressed by her physical condition, but the girl was very lucky. In the morning, Ben brings the children to Leslie's parents' house. He watches them interact with their grandfather. Her mother shows the last letters from her daughter.
We created a paradise out of Plato's Republic. I'm going to get better out here. I know I will.
Later, Ben tells the children they will stay here, but this causes outrage because this house is the opposite of everything he taught them. However, the father, frightened by Vesper's injury, realizes that his entire life was a beautiful mistake.
It was too much, and I knew it. I'll ruin your lives.
Ben unloads the children's belongings from the bus and says goodbye to Jack. He promises to arrange the children's lives in the best way. The man drives away. Sitting behind the wheel, he cries, looking at the empty cabin. Reaching a gas station restroom, he shaves off his long-standing beard. At night, he stops by the roadside, lights a campfire, and suddenly hears a voice.
Shaved your face.
And his children emerge from the bus, having hidden in the luggage compartment. The children want to save their mother and complete the mission, and the father gives in. The family goes to the cemetery and digs up Leslie's coffin, restoring the grave so no one notices the theft. Later, Bo shaves his hair and beard, earning his father's approving smile. Soon the family takes Leslie's coffin to the seaside, where the children build a funeral pyre for her, and after saying their goodbyes, light it under their mother's favorite song. Everyone sings and dances, fulfilling her last wish. Sometime later, they go to the airport to see off Bo, who is flying to Namibia for volunteer work, and also flush their mother's ashes down the toilet according to her will. The father gives his son final advice.
Always tell the truth. Always take the high road. Don't die.
I won't.
Later, the family settles on a farm, raising chickens in their bus, then tends to the farm and the children start going to school. The film ends here. A man wakes up in an unfamiliar place, not understanding where he is, how he got there, and where his phone is. He tries to reach out to someone, but a voice from behind the door advises him to be silent and calm down. An unseen interlocutor informs the man that he has been drugged, and he will feel very unwell for the next few days. But now, it's time for him to work, and he bids him farewell. Joe attempts to make sense of everything that has happened when he hears a small slot opening on the door, through which several food packets fall. Joe rushes to the door and asks the invisible guard for help. He has a pregnant wife at home who needs his assistance, so he needs to get out of here as soon as possible. He is told several times to step away from the door and not to reach his hand into the slot, but the man doesn't listen, resulting in a severe blow to his wrist. He cries, repeating that he doesn't deserve this and shouldn't be here. Later, Joe binds his wrist with his own tie and explores the strange place. He picks up the food and a small water bottle, but just as he's about to try the debut meal, a siren starts blaring, followed by the voice of the Malord Corporation's AI welcoming him to a training program where he will become the best version of himself. Joe asks for information, but his neighbor advises him to keep quiet. His questions will remain unanswered anyway. A countdown to midnight begins, so Joe needs to prepare for his last hours of rest. The man doesn't understand what this means and tries to find out his interlocutor's name, but the interlocutor is surprised. Do they even have names here? The next minute, screams from people behind the walls start to reach Joe, telling him to be quiet and let them rest. The unseen interlocutor advises Joe to accept that this place is Malord, and now he should try to get some sleep because tomorrow will be the longest day of his life. Joe sits against the wall when suddenly a melodic whistle is heard, followed by a man's voice begging not to do it and promising to exceed the plan tomorrow. However, he seems to be beaten and dragged away somewhere. Joe covers his ears to avoid hearing the unfortunate man's voice and the AI's voice that reassures Joe that everything happening is meant to restore his peace of mind. Finally, the sun rises over the enclosure. The same whistle sounds, and a male voice congratulates Joe on the beautiful day and reminds him that the cameras must be kept clean. Otherwise, he will face punishment. At this time, the neighbor's voice speaks again, advising him to obey the orders and calling the nighttime incident a motivational speech to which he will soon become accustomed. Joe gathers some scarce trash and tosses it into a foul-smelling hole in the floor, covered by a small hatch, and there he notices something strange under his feet and, pulling on a strand, discovers that it's hair, beneath which a human skull can be discerned. Joe screams in horror, but the neighbor knows that many people have died here, so Joe will have to get used to it. The neighbor reminds him of the contract he signed when he joined the company. Mallard gives this to everyone, but few read the fine print all the way to the end. So everything has its price. The sooner he gets into the rhythm, the easier his days will be. He just needs to do his work. At that moment, the AI voice kicks in. Joe interrupts it, shouting that he worked for the corporation for 10 years and demands to be released immediately, to which Mallard announces that a qualification enhancement seminar begins today. His productivity has declined recently, and now he has the opportunity to rectify it. Joe was once an exemplary employee, but he gradually stopped appreciating Mallard and everything she gave him. So now he has a new job that will last from 6 in the morning until 10 at night. During this time, he must turn the mill. 1 point for a complete rotation. His daily quota is 50 rotations. Do less, and he will be punished. But Mallard's motto is, enough is not good enough. He must strive to keep his position, salary, corporate apartment, and his life. Mallard wishes him success. Joe tries to persuade the AI to release him, but the neighbor advises not to waste his strength. At the moment, he needs to survive, and for that, he must work. And Joe gets to work. At first, it's very difficult for him, but he pushes through, and it starts to move. Mallard congratulates him on his first rotation, suggesting a virtual toast for his first victory. Joe pushes the mill, listening to the corporation's advertisements. Finally, the signal for the end of the work sounds, and Mallard congratulates him on completing his first day of self-improvement work. He exceeded the quota, which is very good. At night, Joe hears women's screams as Mallard announces another dismissal. Later, the neighbor, learning that Joe doubled the quota, advises him not to maintain such a pace. Joe can't understand the point. If he doesn't meet the quota, he's punished, but if he exceeds it and is last among all, it means death. To which the neighbor advises not to tell everyone about his quota. They're not friends, and the neighbor will always try to outdo him. They all have one thing in common. They climbed the corporate ladder, receiving many bonuses from the company, and seemingly reached the top. But, alas. Suddenly, Joe starts talking about his wife and the future son they had long awaited. And now, he's here. To which the neighbor advises him to work as well as he can. It's the only way to survive here, but overdoing it is not an option. A new workday begins. Joe pushes the mill and remembers how he and his wife inspected their new home, and he promised to work even harder to pay for it. The workday ends when there's a knock on Joe's door, and he's ordered to remove all of his clothes. He becomes scared, but complies. After undressing, he steps out of the door and finds himself under a stream of water. After quickly washing himself, he returns to his chamber. The next day arrives, and the weather outside is significantly hotter, causing Joe to quickly become exhausted. He asks his neighbor what this mill is and what they are all doing here. The neighbor responds that they produce nothing, so the place is empty of purpose or meaning. Soon, Joe runs out of water and tries to call out to the guard, but the guard advises him to collect his urine and drink it, filtered through his sneakers. Joe is absolutely reluctant to do so, and the invisible interlocutor laughs at him, saying that Mallard knows what he needs. Here, he will be pushed to his limits, and Mallard wants to see how far he can go before breaking. Joe continues to work, recalling how his wife doubted his ability to pay all the bills, and he promised that their child would have a better life. That evening, Mallard notes Joe's growing self-awareness. Suddenly, he sees a name carved out: Alex. Later, he asks the neighbor who Alex is, and the neighbor calls him a legend who managed to escape from here. The next morning, Mallard thanks him for his diligence and gives him a personalized pen. Then she displays a new daily quota, 370 laps. Joe is horrified and expresses his frustration in the rudest way. The AI explains that people don't always realize their strengths. It's tough, but this is how the world changes. A signal sounds, and Joe starts pushing the mill. Suddenly, he notices that the counter doesn't mark the laps. Instead, a cross appears, indicating punishment. 1 cross equals 2 laps, and it continues geometrically. Then, the person gives up, but Joe is not planning to do that. With all his strength, he pushes the mill. However, his strength leaves him. When the neighbor learns the number of laps assigned to him, he becomes furious. Joe exceeded the unattainable number of laps, argued with Mallard, and now, all of them, will suffer. Mallard then announces that he failed to meet the quota and disappointed his colleagues. Taking care of them is the company's main principle, so he will have a new colleague, Kate Stevens. Joe is horrified when he sees his wife's face on the screen and promises to exceed any plan just to keep her from being here. Mallard gives him 1 day and activates a massive glowing screen above his compartment, not allowing him to rest. A new workday begins, and Joe starts pushing his mill under Mallard's wishes for a productive day. Suddenly, he sees himself in front of him, a second Joe mocking his hopes. He worked his whole life, hoping his efforts would pay off, but now he's failed and should give up. However, Joe stubbornly continues pushing the mill, and at exactly 10 he completes 370 laps. Mallard congratulates him on this and cancels the penalty. As motivation, they show him images of his wife with a baby in her arms. Joe cries tears of joy, but immediately afterward, tears of sorrow as he missed his son's birth. In the morning, he asks his neighbor to tell him everything he knows about this place. The neighbor recalls his son, whom he saw only in his childhood because his father was always at work. He advises Joe to investigate the blind spot. Joe rushes to the wall and, after a long contemplation, finds an erase spot. Remembering the gifted pen, he uses it to puncture the wall and slightly expand the recess overnight. But a new day dawns and Joe begins pushing the mill, and at night, he again chips away at the wall. This continues for many days and nights. Eventually, he manages to create a hole he can crawl through. Joe crawls through it, but ends up in complete darkness, where suddenly a person appears, hits him on the head, and wishes him sweet dreams. Joe regains consciousness in his chamber. The hole is sealed, and the AI voice sounds once more. Mallard is disappointed, but still willing to give him one last chance. He's so fixated on his desires that he doesn't see the big picture. So his neighbor was punished, and his quota has been increased to 1,000 laps per day. Joe rushes to the wall and learns that his neighbor's leg is broken, and he won't be able to complete even a single lap. Afterward, the man confesses that they are being controlled by a computer he created himself. The first algorithm he wrote self-improved and created the second, and so on. Now people don't know how it works. Then Joe has an epiphany. If they don't work, everyone's score will drop to 0. And what will the algorithm do then? Joe shouts to the others, telling them about his discovery. People respond, supporting his proposal to stop working. But the workday begins, and everyone starts pushing their mills because they are afraid of dying. Joe tries to persuade his neighbors, but realizing the futility, he cries and picks up the pen. In the evening, he talks with his neighbor, and the neighbor reveals his name, Alex. He also managed to escape from his chamber but was brought back, just like Joe, so getting out of here is impossible. At night, Joe hears that Mallard has taken away Alex. In the morning, the AI wakes him up and, to boost his spirits, shows him images of his wife and their walking baby. Joe is horrified. He can't be here for so long. He shouts insults at Mallard and he's fired. Immediately, the doors open and a crowd of clerks enters, positioning themselves on the sides and silently watching Joe as he thrashes among them, trying to get an answer. But then, a man in uniform enters and confesses that he enjoys firings. 12 clerks witnessed each of them. The man loads a syringe and laments Joe's ingratitude when Mallard gave him the whole world. The man hopes to soon have a house available on one of the streets where a single mother with a young son lives. And at that moment, Joe loses control and starts beating him. Mallard announces a security guard's failed mission and his impending firing, while Joe, on the contrary, will be promoted. The man stops, feeling blood on his hands, but the battered guard asks him to continue. And then Joe stands up and shouts that he is not a monster, and he leaves. And right away, Joe finds himself in an office where several employees are sitting, and his interlocutor congratulates him on passing the career advancement simulator. It all happened within an hour, and his son hasn't been born yet. He struggled with middle-level managers but got stuck on the 8th level. Milord realized that he was too good. His productivity increased, his personal qualities improved, and the coup he organized exceeded all expectations. He's a non-conventional thinking leader. Joe takes off the suction cups from himself, but his interlocutor doesn't pay attention and invites him to see his new office. In Milord, there are numerous positions, and you can climb to the top for years. Soon the pair reaches the desired floor, but Joe keeps thinking about the time spent in the simulation. Here's the office with new gadgets. Joe also expects a salary increase and other perks. There's a contract on the table stating that disclosing what he experienced in the simulation will lead to immediate termination. Joe signs it and receives assurances that Milord is his company forever. The man sits down at the table, looks at a photo of his wife, and calls Kate. She's surprised, and the man can barely hold back tears, recalling his long, eventful day. After catching his breath a bit, he promises to burn this damned place. The movie is presented as a science fiction film, but behind every word or action of the hero, the reality of the modern corporate system is clearly revealed. The blatant exploitation of people, causing them to start living to work, rather than working to live. In a cabin in the middle of the forests of North Carolina, 2 people live, a woman named Nydia and her blind son Solomon. The only thing left from the father, a hunter, is an audio recording where he explains to the boy that they were forced to move to this place in the hope that his mother would be able to heal. But the hope was in vain. Nydia's condition only worsened. On that day, the mother calls her son to check the traps. Before leaving the house, the boy habitually ties a rope to his belt, the other end of which is attached to the porch. This measure is necessary so that the child can always find his way home, and so that the mother knows in which direction to look for him if something happens. The woman teaches Solomon how to set and find traps for animals, and approves of how quickly he learns. Later, she shows him how to properly skin animals without damaging the fur, which can then be used to make clothing. One day, the curious boy catches an insect and traps it in a jar, only to be saddened when he notices that the beetle no longer makes any sound. The mother explains that living creatures cannot survive like this. They need air, food, and water. One day, the woman suggests that the child go fishing to celebrate the birthday of his deceased father, who loved this activity and always took Solomon with him. Afterward, she plans to bake a cake, which excites the boy. The pair head to the river. Suddenly, Solomon notes that all the animals and birds seem to have disappeared, and a ringing silence surrounds them. The woman, who also notices this, jokes that they were scared of the boy and warned the fish in the river. The boy relaxes, but the unpleasant feeling remains in his soul. Sitting by the shore, he suddenly asks questions about death. Nydia is surprised but explains that death is simply a change of existence, like a chrysalis turning into a butterfly. Life continues but in a different form. But why is Solomon interested in this? After all, he is young, full of energy, and will live for a long time. After sitting by the shore with their fishing rods and not getting a bite, the woman suggests that the boy dig up some worms. He happily agrees and ventures deeper into the forest. The boy finds some worms near a rotten tree and feels an iron chain under the leaves. But as soon as he tries to pull it to find out where it leads, the mother arrives, sensing something suspicious in the forest. She praises her son for finding the worms, but suggests they finish fishing for the day. The pair return home, where the mother tends to the household chores, the garden and the goat, which provides them with milk. Solomon helps dig up root vegetables. The mother praises her son for his help, hiding that she feels worse and worse. In the evening, she bakes the promised cake and suggests that her son sing the traditional song, but the boy doesn't like it. Then Nydia offers to let him blow out the candle on the cake in front of him, and Solomon fulfills the request, but he refuses to share his wish, believing it won't come true if he does. At night, the mother plays an audio recording she and the boy's father made for little Solomon. They tell a story about a little goat that once ran into the forest where a terrible monster lived. The parents loved their little goat very much and were inconsolable, but the goat, seeing the monster, managed to escape and return home, bringing great joy to his mother and father. They hugged him, and he promised never to return to the dark forest again. After listening to the story again, Solomon again raises the question of death, as he didn't understand his mother's earlier explanation. Then Nydia tells him about faith. However, the boy barely understands and declares that he believes in his mother above all else. The years pass, but one day the mother disappears, leaving the boy only a recording of her voice, in which she says goodbye to her son and reminds him of the 3 main rules of their life. He must always share with the forest everything he gets from it, half for him, half for the forest. The second rule, when he feels down and ready to give up, he must sing their song. And the third rule, he must never take off the rope. Time passes. Solomon becomes a teenager. He has fully adapted to life alone, hunting, fishing, chopping wood, and checking traps on his own. When he feels particularly sad, he listens to the tapes with the voices of his loved ones. One day while eating near the house, the boy hears a strange sound from the thicket. Putting down his plate, he rushes into the forest but finds nothing unusual, though he senses someone's presence nearby. Before bed, he listens to his mother's voice recording again. However, he cannot sleep. The boy gets up and leaves the house. Then he hears the plaintive bleating of his goat and runs towards the sound until the rope reaches its limit. At the very edge of the rope's reach, he manages to feel the goat's body in the grass, but at that moment, something unknown grabs the animal and drags it into the depths of the forest. Feeling his hands, the boy realizes they are covered in blood and tries to wipe it off. Morning comes. Solomon is frightened but continues to live according to his established routine, but one day he suddenly hears a gunshot in the forest. The boy rushes in that direction and stumbles upon a dead deer. But then, a man emerges from the trees, claiming it as his kill. Frightened, Solomon begins to wave his knife, and the stranger is forced to knock him out with the butt of his rifle. The boy comes to his senses, near his house. The hunter, sitting opposite, tends to his wound, apologizing for the harm caused. He read the name on the knife, Lucas, and assumes that's the boy's name. But the boy admits that it was his father's name, who is now gone. The hunter apologizes again, saying he didn't mean to scare him, and noticing the rope, he carried him back to the house. Hank, the man's name, asks the young man why he lives alone and where his parents are, as the boy looks very young. But Solomon doesn't answer. The day is already ending, so the hunter asks for permission to spend the night in the house. In return, he offers some painkillers. When the boy refuses, as he doesn't know what pills are, Hank promises to cook a hot meal from the deer, and Solomon agrees. Hank examines the house from the inside and realizes that the young man has never left its boundaries and therefore simply doesn't know about the outside world. Meanwhile, the boy listens to his mother's last message, huddled in the corner of his room, feeling uncomfortable in the presence of a stranger. Hank finds homemade books that Solomon's mother made for him and feels sorry for the boy. He behaves kindly and generously offers the young man the soup he prepared. He again offers to help the boy, saying he can guide him to people and help him settle into the big world. But Solomon refuses, which Hank attributes to his deep love for home, lamenting that he himself doesn't have one. He again asks about the parents, saying the boy looks a lot like the woman in the photo, perhaps that is his mother. After dinner, they go to bed, though Solomon doesn't part with his knife, but realizing that Hank poses no threat, he finally lies down. However, in the middle of the night, both are awakened by a loud and terrifying sound, similar to the roar of an unknown animal. Hank, armed with a flashlight and rifle, goes outside to check what's happening. It's quiet around the house, and the man heads into the forest. Soon he finds blood traces at the base of a tree and realizes that some animal has died there. On the tree itself there are bloody marks, and the bark is scraped off. Stopping, Hank surveys the area through his scope and notices something suspicious in the bushes. He fires, but the creature leaps from behind the tree with a terrifying roar and charges at him. Realizing he missed, the hunter runs. Reaching the house, he sees Solomon in some sort of trance. The boy just sways from side to side, humming a tune to himself, and doesn't respond to the man's questions. Hank, getting no answers, leaves him alone. After all, he believes he scared off the beast, and now they are safe. The man promises to get the boy out of the forest so he can live a normal life, unafraid of any monster. In the morning, Hank finds Solomon in the shed. He offers to repair it since all the necessary materials are there, except for the chain. Solomon recalls finding a chain in the forest as a child and takes Hank to the spot. The man marvels at how the boy navigates using the rope. The boy explains that it's the only way to survive. Soon they find the place. Hank, noticing the chain, grabs it and starts pulling, but realizing it's tied to something, he follows it and finds some kind of burrow. Nearby lie metal shears which surprises Hank. However, he cuts off a piece of the chain and returns with it to the house. While the man works on the repairs, Solomon asks for a piece of venison, and after receiving permission, throws it into the bushes. To the hunter's surprise, the boy explains that it's a rule. Everything taken from the forest must be shared with it, as his parents taught him. The hunter believes this practice explains the appearance of the beast they heard at night. He suggests they set a trap for the monster to ensure the boy's safety. He also extends the rope, giving the young man the ability to explore new areas. Soon they both head in the direction where Hank saw the unknown beast. Cautiously moving between the trees, they reach the edge of the previously marked area. Suddenly, something unknown grabs the rope and starts pulling Solomon. The terrified hunter chases after the boy, and catching up with the abandoned Solomon, immediately leads him back to the house. Hank tries to calm the young man, assuring him that the beast won't enter the house and they will definitely catch it in the traps they set. He also found his mother's diary and offers to read it to Solomon. The boy listens intently, a thoughtful smile appearing as he hears the lines filled with love and tenderness directed at him. But suddenly Hank stops reading mid-sentence, having read something terrifying. Not wanting to scare the boy, he assures him it's already late and they should go to sleep. As always, Solomon listens to his mother's recording before bed and then goes to sleep. Meanwhile, Hank, making sure the boy's asleep, leaves the house and heads to the place where they found the chain. He approaches the burrow, sees a pile of gnawed bones in front of it, and realizes that this is the lair of the beast. Meanwhile, Solomon wakes up and begins to search for his new friend, and Hank, with his rifle ready, approaches the burrow and suddenly sees a notebook similar to the one in Solomon's house. But this one is scribbled with simple doodles. Deciding that the find has no value, the man puts it back. Meanwhile, realizing that Hank is not around, Solomon sits on the porch and turns on the tape recorder, listening to his mother's voice. But at that moment, he hears a gunshot in the forest. Finding the rope, Solomon runs into the forest, where he suddenly stumbles over Hank's backpack and realizes that the man is somewhere nearby. At that moment, the rope's length ends. For the first time in his life, Solomon breaks the rule and takes it off to find his friend. He crawls around and finds Hank's lifeless body. Solomon mourns his loss when he hears someone standing before him. The terrifying, disheveled creature turns out to be Solomon's mother. Making inhuman sounds, she charges at him, but the chain restrains her. To drive away his fear, Solomon begins to hum the childhood melody. This makes the woman stop, and when she begins to hum along, the boy recognizes her. He cautiously approaches her, and when she lunges at him, she impales herself on a knife and dies. Her eyes, with strange vertical pupils, go still. The young man, coughing heavily, leans against a tree. Trying to recover from everything he's been through, he suddenly hears a crow cawing and looks up at the sky. And then, in his milky eyes, vertical pupils appear, meaning that along with his sight, he has inherited his mother's illness, becoming the new forest beast. A depressingly dull film that exudes hopelessness, cold, and a sense of inevitable futility. But the metaphor with the rope is very apt. A person should never lose their connection to home. The man opens his eyes in the middle of a lake with a red drone flying overhead. Visions of his family, spaceships, and shootouts flash before him. Finally gathering himself, the man swims towards the shore, accompanied by the drone, which he calls Ezra, to check his mental health. Suddenly, cries for help echo from the lake, and another man, followed by a woman, appears. None of them remembers what happened to them. Fina recognizes the wreckage on the shore as the remnants of a warship called Karik, and Ezra recalls an invasion. Then the men discover the remnants of a car that must have been there for centuries. Apparently, there used to be a road in this place. People remember the invasion, and it turns out they all died in different years. Moreover, Abram confesses that he is 67 years old, although he looks 25. According to the red drone, they were brought back to life in their prime years. Their memories are different because they died at different times. Around them is Earth, but 400 years after the extinction of humanity, destroyed by aliens. They were resurrected by creatures living in the water, called sparks. The ultimate goal is the revival of humanity, and the rest of the information can be found in the settlement where the others who have returned live. The drone orders Ezra to collect the sparks. Gathering their meager belongings, the people set off after the drone, trying to understand why the Kariks revived them. Soon they find partially destroyed arches, and Abram rushes to them, rejoicing in his young, strong body. On one of the structures, he sees unknown hieroglyphics and touches them. The man is thrown back, and he admits that he saw everything. Suddenly, the red drone is shot down, and a second shot wounds Abram. The trio runs behind a hill where Ezra, setting up an ambush, captures the pursuer. The man, named Jax, denies the existence of the settlement. The glowing substance on his neck is a skin rider, which is one with the human body. He needs the sparks, but Fina confidently demonstrates her proficiency with a weapon. Abram insists that when he touched the unknown symbols on the arch, he felt the vastness of outer space. But this elicits mockery from Jax, who suddenly frees himself and lunges at Ezra. However, Fina points his own weapon at him. This time they tie the man securely and leave, despite his claim to know Ezra's brother. Soon the team takes shelter in a cave, while others with glowing parasites on their necks are found, including Ezra's brother Silas. Meanwhile, the resurrected people in the cave discuss ways to recreate a human being and wonder where the aliens obtain the initial material. During the night, Abram's wound becomes inflamed. He is lowered into a small pond where the sparks are released. By morning, Abram emerges completely healthy. Fina discusses what happened to Ezra, as she doesn't understand why they chose her out of millions of great people. Soon the resurrected individuals see high walls of a settlement in the distance, but on their way, skin riders with glowing necks catch up to them. Ezra stays behind to delay the pursuit. He manages to do so for a while until he recognizes his brother Silas among them. In the meantime, Fina and Abram reach the settlement's walls, and just when it seems they are destined to be captured, the gates open. A yellow drone neutralizes the skin riders and lets the fugitives inside. It then flies after Ezra, carrying him through the air into the settlement where there's no one around. In response to all their questions, the drone invites them to follow and shows them rows of graves where the settlers rest. Later, the yellow drone opens the doors of an abandoned military base for the people where the previous settlers lived. In the forest, skin riders capture a man who escaped from them. Silas discovers that the glowing creature they call companions has inexplicably stopped functioning in Duncan's neck and promises to fix it. The resurrected individuals learn that the settlers died from a new virus that still spreads throughout the region. The yellow drone asks them to release the sparks into a vessel with water and learns from them that the sparks can create a vaccine if people bring the ingredients found in the living lake. Fina begins to bleed from her nose, and she stays at the base while the men go to the lake. She takes on the task of repairing the damaged red drone. On their way, Ezra tries to understand how the system that brought them back to life works. The drone operates on sparks, but who controls the sparks is unknown. The men reach the lake and release the sparks into the water to collect the necessary ingredients. In the settlement, Ezra's wife Lynn suddenly appears before Fina. She explains that she worked as a nurse during the invasion and can offer help, but then disappears just as suddenly. On the lake's shore, Ezra confesses that one of the skin riders is his brother, meaning these people are also resurrected. He recalls the moment when he first saw the alien spaceship flying overhead and signaled to his brother that he was a worthless, spoiled child. Now he is determined to apologize and try to retrieve Silas. Meanwhile, a hologram of Lynn appears again to Fina, helping her repair the red drone. In the meantime, the yellow drone warns of the approaching skin riders. Ezra asks Abram to run while he himself tries to intercept his brother Silas. However, he gets surrounded and subdued. Regaining consciousness, he finds himself alone with his brother, who admits that he prohibited forcibly transforming him into a skin rider because he wants his brother to join them voluntarily. Each skin rider has a companion on their neck, which teaches the person how to behave correctly and telepathically connects them with others. Thanks to the companion, Silas is now the leader and mentor for the others, whereas in the previous world, he was nobody. Then Silas suddenly falls asleep, signaling Ezra to leave. Ezra meets Abram in the forest, to whom he explains his intention to save his brother. The men return to the lake, where the sparks have created 3 vaccine capsules for them. After consuming their doses, they bring the third one to Fina, whose condition worsens. Lynn asks the red drone to replace her image with someone dear to the girl, and Duncan appears next to Fina. Fina regains consciousness after her friends administer the vaccine. The next day, Abram finds a room that is blocked, revealing a glowing obelisk. Meanwhile, in the forest, Silas argues with Duncan about the purpose of the companion controlling the thoughts of the skin riders in the community because Silas believes it amounts to slavery. In the settlement, Abram learns to read hieroglyphs and understands that the unknown hosts offered to dig up weapons against the skin riders in the forest in exchange for more people for the settlement. Ezra goes to the forest for the excavation. Meanwhile, Silas brings Duncan to an open area where Jax conducts training fights, taunting regular people. Unexpectedly, Duncan defeats Jax. Silas stops the duel and explains that he tested his theory, revealing that humans react faster by a fraction of a second than skin riders. Currently, Duncan has a weak companion, so he makes decisions with just one brain, the human one. In contrast, skin riders with healthy companions have a signal that passes through two brains, the humans and the companions, causing a slight delay. The conclusion is that humans will always outperform them in combat. To gain an advantage over humans, Silas plans to perform brain surgery to reduce the signal delay. However, a working drone and a test subject are required for this. In the meantime, the yellow drone brings Ezra to the excavation site, which the skin riders immediately learn about. Ezra unearths an item that the yellow drone calls a weapon. In the settlement, Abram, upon touching the obelisk, suddenly realizes that he understands the meaning of the hieroglyphs on it. However, he doesn't yet grasp what this knowledge entails. In the forest, the yellow drone warns Ezra about the approaching skin riders. They attempt to flee, but the skin riders surround them and take the unearthed weapon. Unexpectedly, the weapon activates and kills one of the skin riders. Taking advantage of the chaos, Ezra scatters the rest and escapes. Meanwhile, Fina tries to find out from the red drone why the unknown beings are resurrecting humanity. She requests the revival of Duncan, unaware that he has already been resurrected and has become a skin rider. Ezra brings the weapon meant to eliminate skin riders to the obelisk, hoping it will help establish contact. However, he refuses to kill the innocent inhabitants until the obelisk explains who they are and what is happening. The drones controlled by the obelisk promise to resurrect Ezra's family if he obeys them in all matters. Ezra has no choice but to comply. Later that night, Fina goes to the obelisk, where she finds Ezra, who, like her, hopes for the return of loved ones. They notice that the weapon unearthed in the forest has opened. The obelisk issues new symbols, instructing Fina to go to the lake to receive new people. However, skin riders spot her on the way. As for Abram, the drone tells him about the structure of the glowing companion on the necks of the skin riders, which is tightly connected to the human brain through a crystalline structure. The weapon found in the forest destroys these crystals, eliminating the parasite. When a skin rider dies, its memory is preserved on the crystal, which is passed down to its ancestor. This is what needs to be found and destroyed. Fina sees Lynn emerging from the lake and helps her get ashore. When Jax appears on the shore, the red drone neutralizes him. The girls attempt to escape but are captured by Duncan, who seizes the red drone and fails to recognize Fina, his beloved from the past. The girls try to flee, but Lynn injures her leg and orders Fina to go to the settlement and fetch her husband. Lynn, on the other hand, falls into the hands of the skin riders, who return her to the lake. There, Jax shows how the sparks work, healing her injured leg. But suddenly a stone hits Jax's head, and an unknown little wild girl takes Lynn to her forest dwelling, providing her with shoes and food. However, it turns out the girl cannot speak. During this time, Fina reaches the base and informs Ezra about the resurrection of his wife, Lynn. Despite the yellow drone's warning that when skin riders take someone, it's forever, Ezra is determined to rescue her. Jax finds the little wild girl's home, but she has already taken Lynn away. They hide in the forest. At the same time, Ezra contemplates how to disable the force field since the obelisk prevents him from doing so, leaving him unable to leave the gates. Fina admits that she saw Duncan, who is also with the skin riders now, and he didn't recognize her. She fears the same will happen to Lynn. Meanwhile, in the forest, Jax tracks the runaways and explains that even the sparks make mistakes, resulting in flawed individuals. He is ready to destroy the little girl, but Lynn persuades him not to do it. At the same time, Silas extracts the crystal companion from the deceased skin rider's neck and instructs one of the women to take it to the ancestor. Then, they bring Lynn to him. As for Abram, while communicating with the obelisk, he suddenly surmises that he had lived in this settlement before, which is confirmed by a notebook he found with his own handwriting. Later, Fina speculates that they all have lived here before. The yellow drone confirms this fact and leads Abram to a graveyard where he shows everyone who is buried there, including Ezra's grave. It turns out that he had also been resurrected and lived in the settlement at one point. Then the yellow drone guides Abram to the next grave, where he finds himself and encourages him to start a new life honorably. Fina demands that the man bind himself. He agrees, but suddenly snatches a weapon from Fina and stuns the skin rider standing behind her. At the same time in the bunker, Abram is trying to find out from Yellow where the progenitor is located. However, she does not know, but Jax knows, and he heads to the bottomless lake, dives into it, and emerges in a cave. Meanwhile, Silas is trying to convince Ezra that life in his community is much better than in the bunker. Fina begins to trust Duncan and agrees with his plan. And in the camp, Lynn's escape is discovered. Duncan immediately receives a message about this from other skin riders and agrees with Fina's plan to send them on a false trail to enter the camp and save Ezra. The pursuit heads in another direction. Silas demonstrates to his brother the capabilities that a companion gives to the human body. He dips his hand into a vessel with sparks and explains that they cannot kill a companion as it goes against their principles. So if Ezra wants to kill the companion, he will have to kill the person. Fina and Duncan infiltrate the camp and seize the skin riders' weapons, and Jax reaches the ancestors' dwelling place. He asks them to explain how the drone works, and several human figures come out to him. Fina and Duncan find Lynn. The girl explains that after being infected by the parasite, she immediately plunged her hand into the sparks, and it seems to have helped. Duncan asks the women to leave while he finds Ezra. The ancestors show Jax how the drone works. And in the bunker, Yellow confesses to Abram that not a human lies in one of the graves. Silas proves to Ezra that the obelisk is no better than a companion, as it also subjugates people. He lets slip that all of them, including his brother's wife and daughter, once lived in the settlement. Their conversation is interrupted by Duncan, who, under threat of arms, takes Ezra and leads the group to the settlement by a shortcut. But the protective barrier detecting a companion in Duncan does not let him pass, unlike Lynn. Then Fina ties his hands. But at that moment, the pursuit led by Silas bursts onto the clearing. Duncan pushes Fina behind the barrier, and they with Ezra prepare to fight. Abram runs to the obelisk, and it lets the men through on the condition that Duncan remains in the yard until they figure out how to free him from the parasite. At the same time, the ancestors express concern about Jax's hatred for humans, as they are much better carriers than Kariks, and they advise him to find a compromise. Meanwhile, Duncan confesses that his companion is still weak, but he is gaining strength. He remembers the settlers and confirms that Kylie is alive. Sparks rejuvenate people in the prime of life, but children at the age of their actual death. He also lost a wife and a child, and it was Fina, although the woman does not remember this. Abram explains that they are another generation of the revived. The first one lies in the graves, and they are them too. Jax reprograms the red drone, refusing everything human that was in its memory. Fina unties her husband, but when she falls asleep, Duncan's companion receives a signal from Silas, and he heads to the bunker. There, Abram confesses to Ezra that the drone showed him the memory of another woman he saw a year before the invasion. It feels like someone knew about the invasion and offered people help. He wants to consult with Yellow, but she is nowhere to be found. This happens because Duncan is just locking the drone behind one of the panels. Then he attacks Abram, knocks him out, and heads to the obelisk, despite his human side resisting it. He screams in frustration, and Ezra hears him. He runs to him, but Duncan closes the doors and enters symbols that deactivate the force field. Realizing this, Ezra rushes to Fina, and they manage to barricade the bunker doors. Duncan's companion comes out in the open and confesses that all this was done for the sake of the weapon he hid. He is ready to reveal where Kylie is now if they hand over the bunker to the skin riders. The man is tied up. Outside, the sounds of banging are heard, skin riders trying to break down the door. Through Duncan, Silas offers to hand over the bunker. Then he will say where Ezra's daughter is now, because someone from the first settlement managed to avoid death from disease. A debate ensues, resulting in a decision to deactivate the parasite using Lynn's medical knowledge. Jax returns. He expresses his dissatisfaction to Silas, as he could have infected Ezra long ago, but lets him go. Silas cuts off the conversation and orders to continue working on the drone. At this time in the bunker, Lynn tries to figure out how the companion works, and it confesses that it can cause great pain to its master. Ezra and Abram conclude that the settlement existed for at least 10 years, and there must be survivors, otherwise, who buried the fallen. Moreover, Yellow said that a drone is buried in one of the graves. At that moment, the knocking at the door resumes. Ezra remembers that there is electricity in the bunker. Fina digests the cable, and a strong electric shock destroys one of the skin riders. At the same time, Abram finds Yellow. Simultaneously, people realize that Duncan is acting as a transmitter, and they move him to another room. As they part, Ezra asks to tell his brother that he loves and believes in him. This message puzzles Silas. Yellow scans Duncan and discovers that the parasite has affected all human organs, and even the sparks cannot save him. Abram tries to get answers from the obelisk. Moreover, Yellow said that Duncan was given access codes, but by whom? The man again remembers that woman in the hospital. She had a drone, sparks, and symbols of knowledge on her bracelet, so something was known before the invasion. At Ezra's request, Yellow shows the image of the woman, and he recognizes his mother, Eleanor. Meanwhile, Silas prepares to continue breaking down the doors, but something leads him to the cemetery. Jax, following him, reminds him that he is not human and he should not care about the graves, so he intends to start silencing personalities from him. Silas is arrested. At this time in the bunker, Yellow confesses that Eleanor was one of the initiators of the revival of the human race. Duncan is not lying. Kylie was in the settlement, and only he can say where the survivors are now. Duncan's companion is knocked out with a tranquilizer, and the man is tied to a table. While the parasite sleeps, the man comes to and points on the map the direction the survivors went. He advises finding the wild girl and wakes up. After which, Yellow finds the weapon he had hidden earlier. The people notice the silence outside and, opening the doors, kill the sentinels left by the skin riders. Making sure that there is no one else in the yard, Ezra and Lynn say goodbye to their friends and set out to find Kylie. Jax activates the drone, intending to remove the human personality from Silas, and learns about the presence of Ezra and Lynn in the forest. He sends the skin riders to follow the pair. Fina comes to Duncan and admits that she is ready to kill him to free her loved one. However, Yellow knocks him out. The man regains consciousness in the cemetery and is relieved, thinking that Fina could not bring herself to harm him. In fact, Yellow has injected a beacon into his body, and now people can track his path. At this time, Ezra and Lynn find the wild girl and ask her to guide them to Kylie. Silas regains consciousness when the red drone informs him that he did the opposite, preserved his personality, and suppressed the parasite's capabilities. At the same time, Ezra and Lynn notice they are being followed and try to evade the skin riders. However, arrows fly from the rocks, the skin riders perish, and the survivors approach the people. Meanwhile, in the camp, Jax leaves Duncan on guard while he and his people follow Ezra and Lynn. They are then scanned for safety, and upon confirmation, the settlement leader Rowan leads them into the camp. She warns them that they do not truly know their daughter. They only remember her up to the age of 6, and they are merely copies of those who lived in the settlement. Abram and Fina dig up a broken drone from the grave, hoping to retrieve data from its memory. Rowan brings Ezra and Lynn to the hidden camp in the mountain caves. Noticing the strange expressions on people's faces, she explains that they both died defending the previous camp from an attack. If it weren't for Lynn, no one would have survived. Silas killed the woman. Fina connects Yellow to the memory of the broken drone, and she promises to show the events of the past. At the camp, Ezra and Lynn's adult daughter arrives. Although she understands what they feel, she refuses to recognize them as her parents. Red notices that Silas is experiencing severe pain. He flies to Duncan, and at that moment in the camp, a bloody Justin appears, who orders him to take the rest of the people and rush to the place where they were ambushed. He carries out the order, and Jax disappears because it was a hologram created by Red. Silas escapes. The real Jax finds the ambush site and orders a search of the rocks. In the bunker, Yellow transports Fina and Abram into a virtual reality of the past settlement, where people go about their daily activities. Jax enters the gates and explains that Silas developed a growth on his neck, after which he attacked his friends. All this happened near the old Karrick ship. Returning to their reality, the people realize that this was the first case of companion infection. Yellow explains that the parasites create a structure similar to fungal spores. Silas likely inhaled them. The parasites themselves were brought by the Karricks, who were their carriers before humans. Meanwhile, a boy from the survivors, Thomas, carelessly falls into the hands of Justin. Silas begins to experience severe pain. Red tries to alleviate his condition and notices Duncan rushing towards the bunker. Apparently, he has discovered his escape and wants to detain Silas. Red leads him another way. At the same time, Thomas learns that he has been infected with the parasite. At the camp, his absence is noticed. Rowan calls a council and Ezra advises them to flee. If Thomas reveals the camp, they will not survive. Yellow shows how Abram proposed to create a virus capable of killing the parasite, although the idea itself belongs to the obelisk. People heatedly discuss this proposal, and many disagree. Lynn suggests splitting up. Those who take the virus should stay in the bunker, as they will be weakened. Rowan speaks against it. Abram realizes that he was the cause of the remaining deaths. In the caves, Ezra urges everyone to leave while he defends them. At this time, Silas reaches the bunker and sees Duncan sitting by a campfire. He lures him into the workshop and locks him in there. Abram is overwhelmed with guilt, runs to the obelisk, and voices his accusations. Suddenly, it creates the image of a second Abram, who says that on the other side of the obelisk are creators who sincerely believed they were saving the settlement. The virus just turned out to be slower than the parasite cells. The second Abram disappears as voices of Ezra and Lynn come from behind the doors. Fina opens the doors, and friends push Silas inside. They immediately disappear as they were holograms created by Red. Silas asks to be heard. The drone supports this request and reports that they cannot destroy the ancestor without Silas. At this point, the boy loses consciousness and they bring him inside. Ezra, Lynn, and the young archers set up an ambush, but Thomas appears, shoots at them, and wounds Kylie's fiancé, Nico. Ezra kills the boy, and upon examining, finds a parasite. Lifting his arrow, he realizes there is something on its tip. At that moment, Jax appears with his people and calls them to battle. Red puts Silas into a coma. Meanwhile, Lynn and Kylie bring the injured Nico inside. Justin orders his man to watch the backup entrance to the cave. Lynn starts treating Nico, but the worst part is that the arrow tip might have a parasite larva. The boy then demands to be killed, as Lynn herself set such rules. Duncan tries to call any of the skin riders for help, and Yellow explains to Fina and Abram that the parasite is killing Silas so that he cannot reveal the way to the progenitor. Then Red admits that he can link the minds of Abram and Silas, which might help reveal the secret. At this time, Kylie decides to help her father patrol. The girl recalls the past and calls Jax his best friend, which greatly surprises Ezra. And his urge to kill arises because the parasites are very afraid that the human inside might take over if he remembers his attachments. Father and daughter return to the cave, and Ezra proposes that his wife, daughter, and Nico take another road while he guards them. After heated arguments, they head to the second exit. Abram enters Silas's mind and finds himself in a church. It turns out that the boy's mind considers the church a sanctuary. Abram admits that Silas will no longer come to himself, and he himself describes the way to the lake of the progenitor. The parasites are interconnected precisely through it. It is the source of their energy, strength, and knowledge. Silas knows for sure humanity will not survive if the lake does not disappear. Ezra resorts to trickery, and Kylie kills a lurking skin rider. The father bids farewell to everyone and stays in the cave. At the same time, Abram and Fina develop a plan to destroy the progenitor. Yellow explains that the weapon consists of 3 parts. 2 of these are standalone weapons, capable of operating independently of each other. However, the top part is dangerous for humans themselves, so it is discarded. Only the lower part remains, which destroys the progenitor. But this part will not work without the middle, where a human personality must be placed. But the progenitor has studied all the skin riders in this world, so the chances of getting into it are slim. And then Abram realizes why Silas was needed. Later, Fina reflects on her promise to Duncan to kill him and free him from the parasite. Then, Yellow admits that her husband is in the workshop in the yard. The woman arms herself and heads to the yard, but just as she is ready to open the door to the workshop, a skin rider enters the yard and releases Duncan. Fina tries to stop the men, but Duncan reminds her that she cannot kill him and leaves. At this time, Abram comes to Silas again and explains that they need his help. Jax decides to attack, realizing that Ezra is the only defender of the camp. He orders his men to engage him while he himself follows the trail of Lynn, Kylie, and Nico. Nico is losing strength, and Lynn decides to make a stretcher, although the boy asks to just leave him. And Ezra sets up an ambush, and one by one eliminates the skin riders, then follows the trail of his wife. Nico transforms and grabs Lynn by the throat. He is ready to kill the woman, but Kylie interferes. The boy's companion admits that the girl is very dear to him, but he cannot indulge the carrier's weaknesses, and when Nico raises his sword, Kylie shoots him. Ezra catches up with them, not knowing that Jax is monitoring their reunion, but he receives a message about Silas's betrayal, and Jax leaves. Silas asks Abram to wait for his death, take his crystal, and insert it into the weapon. Then he will be in the middle part and can help. Abram does not fully understand how it works, but thanks Silas. They say goodbye. Abram comes to his senses when Silas dies, and Jax catches up with Duncan and his men by the lake. After a dispute, he orders everyone to stay in ambush, and he and Duncan will dive to the progenitor. Meanwhile, Lynn and Ezra bury Nico and console their daughter. Simultaneously, Fina and Abram bury Silas. Later the groups meet, unaware that a black drone is watching them, which takes off above the earth and heads for a spacecraft. Abram tells Ezra everything that happened with his brother and the plan to destroy the progenitor, but he does not want to endanger his family. Yellow vaccinates Kylie, explaining that the vaccine was made by Sparks. The girl tells Fina that Duncan became a skin rider after her death, and no one knows how it happened. At the same time, Abram admits that he no longer believes in the obelisk, but he believes in Silas and is ready to do everything to destroy the progenitor. He tells Ezra about the weapons operation. A part of Silas will guide them inside, but what to do next, he doesn't know. Ezra laughs at such a plan, and his daughter hears this. Abram and Fina try to convince Ezra that this is why they were resurrected. Otherwise, humanity is doomed. But they cannot persuade him. Then Abram and Fina leave together. Ezra is tormented by guilt, although Lynn tries to remind him of his duty to his family. At this time, Kylie is reviewing the map to the progenitor's lake and secretly leaves the bunker. Red informs the parents that he cannot find the girl, and they, realizing where she has gone, rush after her. Meanwhile, Kylie catches up with Fina and Abram, and later Ezra and Lynn appear. Thus they all come together again, but at the lake itself, they fall into an ambush by the Skin Riders. A battle ensues in which the group of survivors wins, but Abram is seriously wounded. However, Kylie has Sparks with her, and she suggests releasing them into the lake. As they start doing this, Duncan emerges from the water and shoots Lynn and Kylie. Fina, under the cover of a shield, rushes to him, and they both disappear under the water. Ezra releases the Sparks and brings the wounded into the water. Then a wounded Fina emerges, saying she couldn't overcome Duncan. Ezra dives and finds a wounded Duncan, who has reverted to his true self before death. He apologizes and loses consciousness, and Ezra sees in front of him a glowing something with crystals and fits the lower part of the weapon onto one of them. Then he inserts Silas's little crystal into the middle part of the weapon and looks for the place where it needs to be placed. But then Jax appears. He has always hated his carrier and all humans, and he will not let the progenitor be destroyed. The men engage in combat, and just as Jax is about to win, the revived Duncan attacks him. Ezra finds the right crystal and fits the middle part of the weapon onto it, and suddenly finds himself in a room where he is met by Silas. The brother explains that they are inside the progenitor, and only he could create this home in this place. He is a Trojan horse from which destruction will enter the progenitor. Ezra picks up the box with the symbol of knowledge from his mother and realizes that it is a detonator. The brother says goodbye to him, and when Jax appears, they activate the bomb. Ezra finds himself in the cave where the progenitor is destroyed, to Jax's great sorrow. The man emerges and finds his loved ones healed. Their elation is washed by a black drone, which again heads to the spaceship, where it is met by Eleanor and Duncan. They realize that the deed is done and humanity has a chance. Despite some illogicality, the story is quite extraordinary. It's not about battles with aliens, as the Kariks are only briefly shown once in a flashback, and not about humans' attempts to cunningly escape the dictate of their rule. At the heart is the question of the value of a person, the preservation of which can lead to peace and the rebuilding of civilization. An alien race from the depths of space colonizes Earth. Millions of people from around the world are sent to work in mines on other planets. Those left on Earth are controlled with implanted tracking chips and giant alien robots positioned around the perimeters of cities. Oh wow, you hear me? Ah! Chicago, 2019. The city is under martial law due to a massive alien attack on all major cities of the world. The Drummond family, a father, a mother, and their 2 sons, tries to leave the city, but all exits are blocked. When a police officer stops their car at one of the exits, the father presses the gas pedal and breaks through the blockade. Entering an exit tunnel, the man is forced to stop as the exit is blocked by aliens. Taken by surprise, the father freezes, although his wife asks him to turn around. Suddenly, an unknown pulse tears through both adults sitting in the front seats. The children, looking up, see an incomprehensible creature standing right in front of their car's hood. 9 years later, the world, having surrendered without a fight to the invaders, is completely under their control. The operation of vital productions, including power plants, has been restored everywhere. The aliens are called legislators because all laws and rules now come from them. Over the years since Earth's surrender, the aliens have forced humans to build suitable living spaces for them underground, called closed zones, where only high-ranking human officials are allowed entry. It became clear that the alien invasion aimed at Earth's resources, their extraction, and exportation led to huge social stratification. The rich, working for the aliens, continue to live well, while the poor have lost all guarantees, including education and healthcare. Police lawlessness thrives, and the deportation of all undesirable people from the planet has begun. The alien systems block all communication lines, so people know nothing about the life of other cities and countries. Amidst this wave, a resistance emerged, planning an attack on the closed zone in Chicago. But the plan failed, the zone was unharmed, and the fate of the rebels remains unknown, although the police assure that they were all eliminated. And this was supposed to be the first spark from which a flame would ignite. 9 years after the failed uprising in Chicago, the police monitor anyone who raises even the slightest suspicion. Detective William Mulligan reviews video recordings from Gabriel's apartment, whose brother Rafe died in the uprising and was posthumously named a hero of the resistance. The guy goes through his usual morning routines, then wakes up his girlfriend, showing her a photo taken on the other side of the lake, where visiting is now prohibited. But the girl does not want to believe in a change in their lives and asks not to invent the impossible. Gabe leaves the house where his friend, who has obtained and repaired a boat, is already waiting for him, so they can sail out of the city tonight. But Gabe reminds him that he is under round-the-clock surveillance. Meanwhile, Mulligan reviews the newspapers and sees an advertisement for the Phoenix fire suppression system, after which he goes to his old friend Jane, who now runs a brothel. At the entrance, he sees the Phoenix emblem on the wall and notices the police chief. The owner greets Mulligan as a good friend and hands him a gift box, mentioning the Donnans and their gifts. Returning to the police station, he shares his findings. Phoenix exists and is preparing something for the New World Masters, but his partner does not believe that anyone could have survived the last purge. At this time in the subway, 2 resistance members meet because the newspaper advertisement is a battle readiness order given by their leader, whom they call First. He has learned that there is an entrance to the zone through the stadium, and soon there will be a unity festival, which high-ranking aliens will attend. The only thing left is to infiltrate. The next day, Gabe goes to work, having passed through the recognition system, since every person now has an identifier chip inside. The guy works in a data restoration center where he views millions of private videos a day and checks browser history requests. He sends all the collected information to the Central Information Center and destroys the carriers. Later, he receives a cigarette containing an unknown substance from his colleague and hides it behind his ear. After work, Gabe exits to the outside with a crowd of other workers and sees arriving guards grab and lead away one of the women. At the same time, an alien transport ship is sending off another batch of people as slaves for the alien mines from Earth. And around the perimeter of the city stand giant alien robots to prevent people from escaping. Gabe goes to the boat but is horrified at the sight of the weapon in his friend's hands. If they get caught, they will be instantly destroyed. Their scuffle is interrupted by the appearance of Mulligan, who orders Gabe to get into his car. He reminds the boy that he was his father's partner and now asks not to repeat his brother's mistakes and make the right choice. Gabriel has no information about Phoenix, and he does not intend to snitch, so the conversation goes nowhere. Gabriel goes to the person he is supposed to sell the acquired cigarette to, but the potential client pushes the boy into his van and, putting on them special collars that jam the tracking chip signal, drives him to the center of a destroyed district, where in one of the surviving buildings, Gabe meets his living brother. After a joyful reunion, Rafe tells him that he is the only survivor from his group. Unknown to him, Craftsman removed his chip, and now he has joined a new group. He takes the cigarette and, giving his brother a large sum of money, orders him to leave the area because Phoenix plans to attack the invaders. The brothers argue about the necessity of the uprising, but Rafe is sure that as long as there is time to fight, they should fight. Gabriel then rushes into his apartment and hurriedly starts packing, convincing his girlfriend to join him. The girl tries to persuade the boy to stay, and seeing the money and learning that Rafe is alive, asks the boy to think carefully, as they could then be recorded as accomplices. The couple argues, unaware that the police are closely listening to their conversation. Gabe leaves alone, but immediately encounters Mulligan, who was following him. Gabriel runs away from Mulligan and hides in the secret passages underground. He puts on the remaining collar, and the aliens' drones do not lose sight of him. Mulligan returns to the station, where he has an entire room dedicated to Phoenix, and notes that Rafe might be alive. At this time, Rafe's carrier pigeon reaches the recipient, and the information is passed along the chain to a secret IP center, where upon entering the received numbers, its worker displays Phoenix's target, an official who will gain access to the closed zone that day. The newspapers immediately publish Phoenix's announcement, and the group members receive the call. One of them, working on the radio, plays a conditional track heard by a man with a dog, who immediately takes her for a walk. Her bark is heard by a mechanic girl who rushes to her car. Later they arrive at an underground clinic where a doctor performs complex operations to remove the tracking chips. Then, he hands over the chips extracted from law-abiding citizens previously deceased from diseases, as well as special containers that need to be kept in the mouth, so they too will be recognized as law-abiding citizens. Meanwhile, one of the resistance members, serving as a priest, meets with Rafe. The pair goes to an arms dealer and receives invisible explosive material from a girl extracted from a crashed alien ship. If attached to an organic carrier skin or hair, scanners will not be able to detect it. Later, the resistance group gathers together. The leader distributes containers with new chips and shows a photo of the person who will go to the aliens. Lastly, he hands out poison capsules to everyone, which will help avoid being captured alive by the enemy. The group freely enters the festival and attaches the invisible alien explosive device to an official. He goes to the arriving aliens and explodes with them. The city is immediately locked down, and the police block the streets to find the attackers. The priest is the first to die, caught in gunfire. Rafe is caught by one of the aliens and tries to escape from it, hiding in a van. This is seen by the guy's comrades, who come to his rescue and destroy the alien. The surviving rebels try to escape from the city, while the aliens bring in hunter warriors from another world, and they quickly track down Rafe and his accomplices. Enraged, the legislators prepare to destroy the district where, according to their information, the resistance is based. Mulligan tries to persuade the police chief, who is heading to report to the aliens, not to allow this because he needs time to catch the suspects, but he is reminded that the decision is made and his search interests no one. Raids begin in the city, during one of which Gabe is captured, while his brother and two of his comrades reach the station and board buses 2 minutes before the expiration of the chips from law-abiding citizens. But when it seems they have managed to escape, the buses are stopped by the hunters. Realizing his capture is inevitable, one of the group takes the poison capsule. The mechanic girl attacks a hunter and is instantly vaporized. Rafe tries to run but is captured and brought to the police, where his brother is being interrogated at the same time. Mulligan shows him how Rafe is tortured to make him talk about Phoenix and give up first. Gabe learns that the city is preparing for destruction and agrees to send a message to the leader. He is brought to the surviving members of the resistance, and hearing that the guy allegedly knows ways into the zone, they agree to connect him with First. Gabe is brought to Jane Doe, who is number 1 in the leader of the resistance in the city. Upon seeing the boy, the woman calls him by name, which confuses Gabrielle, and at that moment, a police squad raids the brothel and kills Jane. The investigation reveals that Jane had installed listening devices to record conversations with police officers she served to gather secret information. Later, during a briefing with the aliens, Mulligan names the members of Phoenix who, learning about the death of First, voluntarily left this life. Before the invasion, Jane was a history teacher and changed her profession to gather secret information. Mulligan presents recordings obtained in the brothel, where it is heard that the police chief actively leaked secret information about the aliens. Captured resistance members are deported to alien mines, and Mulligan, having declared the neutralization of the Chicago threat, is appointed acting commissioner. Later, he meets with Gabe and puzzles the boy with a new thought. What if the failure of the uprising was planned? And he hands the boy a memory card, extracted from a phone once given to him by Jane. The next day, Gabe views its contents, a video dedicated to a party before his birth, where close family friends record messages for him. There, he sees both Mulligan and Jane Doe, who was acquainted with his mother, as well as some other members of Phoenix. Meanwhile, Mulligan is allowed to arrive at the Earth Control Center and meet with the legislators in their habitat. As he heads to the spaceship, the same invisible substance that was part of the explosive used in the stadium attack manifests on him, explaining that Mulligan is also part of the resistance, and the plan was organized so that he could infiltrate the main alien base and set off an explosion. During the credits, a map shows that the plan worked, and the city blockades were successfully lifted, after which many resistance foci flared up everywhere. This means that the plan to light a match and ignite a bonfire was a success, and humanity begins an active fight against the alien oppressors. Despite the film being labeled as science fiction, the message here is quite realistic. How will humanity behave when it realizes the possibility of its total occupation? Also, the filmmakers draw belief in victory from the history of humanity, using Lenin's motto, "A spark will kindle a flame." The struggle, the underground conspiracy. The film is full of revolutionary stylistics, and it watches like a real political thriller. Japan 2023. People board a train and head to work. Everyone is busy with their own things, scrolling through Instagram feeds, making acquaintances on social networks, and discussing plans for the evening, unaware that in just a few minutes, their lives will change forever. Suddenly, the train's speed increases, and strange things start happening. A bottle cap rolling on the floor of the carriage suddenly disappears. Passengers begin receiving alerts about powerful earthquakes on their phones. Then the train enters a gloomy tunnel and comes to a sudden halt. People regain consciousness, bewildered by what has happened. One of the passengers opens the entrance doors, and people, screaming and pushing each other, rush to the exit, jumping from the high steps. But once outside, they can't believe their eyes. Traces of the civilized world are gone, and they are surrounded by the remnants of a destroyed city overgrown with trees and grass. Moreover, all the carriages have disappeared without a trace, except for the fifth one they were in. As time passes, the passengers begin to get acquainted. One of the guys, Shirahama, a firefighter, examines the injured and suggests checking the tunnel behind the carriage. He is joined by a girl named Katana and a guy named Hayashima, who also wants to understand what happened. Meanwhile, the police in the city cannot figure out where the last two carriages have gone, while the rest of the train, along with the passengers, remains undamaged. The three volunteers enter the tunnel and walk through the dark underworld for a long time. Suddenly, they notice a light ahead and hurry towards it, but when they emerge outside, they are astonished. There is nothing around that would remind them of the year 2023 with skyscrapers and technology, just a vast, lifeless desert. Shocked, the trio returns to their fellow misfortune mates. Initially, people do not believe their report, but after Hayashima shows a video recording of the surroundings, they are forced to accept the new reality. After 7 hours, people languish in anticipation of rescuers, when one of the girls, Reni, secretly looks into Hayashima's bag and finds a letter marked with the criminal department's seals, leading her to suspect that the guy's a criminal. Then Reni snatches food from Katana's bag, but, thinking she was seen, discards the package. Hayashima picks it up and carries it to the train, just as Katana discovers the theft. Seeing it in the guy's hands, the passengers accuse him of theft. Moreover, Reni reports about the letter from the colony. Offended, Hayashima denies the accusations and announces his departure. At this time, Shirahama pulls out a box of fruits and offers to share them. While Katana is distributing the food, one of the guys reviews the video he made earlier, clearly showing Reni stealing the food. Realizing that Hayashima is innocent, Shirahama and Katana run after him, managing to save the guy who nearly falls into a deep ditch. In gratitude, he confesses that he works as a hairdresser and is already 30 years old. But he refuses to explain the origin of the letter from the colony. Night falls. Passengers somehow settle down to sleep, but many cannot sleep, worrying about their future. In the morning, people begin to realize that they may never return home. Shirahama tries to gather the scattering people, but a friend asks the guide not to take responsibility for others' lives. Then the firefighter confesses that because of him, His colleague was injured, losing the ability to walk. Now he believes he must help everyone he can. Together, they catch up with those who left and persuade them to return to the carriage to solve problems collectively. Seeing this, Hayashima remembers his brother who was in prison, and the letter in his bag was from him. Fate had it that he had to take on the upbringing of his younger brother, and he still feels guilty for his older brother becoming a criminal. Meanwhile, a couple of passengers explore the surrounding area and find the ruins of a high tower. This is particularly strange because the news reported its construction, which was supposed to be completed in 2026. And one of the passengers found a can in the forest dated that year. A biologist among them encountered a plant whose genetic modification takes 30 years. It turns out that they are in the distant future of Earth, and it's far from a joyful discovery. At the same time in 2023, all channels are broadcasting messages about the disappearance of 2 carriages, which had at least 100 passengers. Night approaches and many fall into despair, while Katana and Shirahama place plastic containers on the roof of the carriage, hoping for rain. In the morning, the biologist draws the others' attention to the dense greenery, which means there must be a body of water nearby. A group of youth sets out to explore the forest. Along the way, Hayashima confesses that his parents are criminals, and then the guy spots a frog. This means water is very close, but ahead are impassable cliffs, which can only be climbed with the help of ropes. The group returns to the train and cutting wires heads back to the cliffs. Shirahama climbs to the top and joyfully shouts upon seeing a waterfall, but looking around he is horrified. Instead of Mount Fuji, a sea stretches out before him. Returning, he tells the others about this, and people start to speculate what happened to their planet. At night, everyone goes to sleep, but the eldest passenger, Tanaka, goes outside and sees an unfamiliar person. But when he tells about it, no one believes him. Then it starts to rain, helping people to collect water and even bathe. Meanwhile, the biologist continues to study the surrounding fauna, finds several edible plants, and shows them to the others. And still, Katana manages to eat a poisonous berry, but fortunately, her poisoning is not fatal. The news that the girl has recovered has a sobering effect on the passengers. They finally realize that sitting still, they won't survive. People get to work and even make utensils from bamboo. Bank cards turn out to be decent knives. The group of youths brings water from the waterfall, and they prepare a soup from plants. But after dinner, some feel sick and the biologist discovers a couple of poisonous berries in the common pot. Someone remembers seeing Tanaka near the pot, who is not among them. Shirahama sets out to look for him, but stumbles, falls, and loses his torch. After a while, Shirahama returns without Tanaka, but with Hayashima's previously lost barber tools, which he had sorely missed. In the morning, the biologist announces to the people that he is going to look for a river, which should be nearby. His friends go with him. But in the forest, they encounter a stranger who injures the biologist and runs away. The guys carry him back to the train, where fortunately there is a medical student who provides the injured with first aid. The others help as much as they can and pray for the guy. Later, Tanaka unexpectedly returns from the forest. It turns out he worked for a security company and can show how to make traps around the camp. Reni asks Hayashima to fix her hair, and soon there's a cue for the guy. Meanwhile, Shirahama and Katana notice a teenager caught in one of the traps, but the youngster gets out on his own and runs away. The friends hurry after him and soon find themselves by the river, but the boy asks them to wait for him at the spot and disappears into the forest. Hayashima, noticing their disappearance, catches up with the pair. At this time, the teenager returns and leads the friends to carriage number 6, which mysteriously ended up several kilometers away from the 5th carriage. The passengers from the 5th carriage are welcomed by the leader of the group from the 6th carriage, Yumamoto. Their carriage was lucky to be near the river, where there was plenty of fresh water and fish. Moreover, among them was a builder who, under his guidance, they were able to quickly set up a camp and even build a kitchen and a toilet. The newcomers find the one who injured their biologist. He confesses that he did it out of fear, thinking they were going to attack him. He bows deeply, apologizing for his action. And Yumamoto admits that he believes a return to the past is possible. The man told them that in the early days, they found a small boat on the river, where he managed to fix the radio and catch a signal, apparently from Canada, where the year 2060 was mentioned. From what he heard, the man understood that in 2026 a disaster occurred. A huge asteroid fell to Earth, causing powerful earthquakes and tsunamis worldwide, instantly taking billions of lives. The dust thrown into the atmosphere blocked sunlight, leading to the extinction of the remaining species. But the main thing is that the asteroid didn't fall by chance. It was space debris, as besides state corporations, satellites began to be launched by anyone who fancied. One of the probes collided with a satellite, which in turn fell onto an asteroid, leading to a deviation of its orbit. So it was a man-made disaster. That's why it's so important to return to their year and change the future. Inspired by the example of the sixth carriage, the passengers decided to make a bath by the river. Meanwhile, Tanaka continues to deteriorate, making himself a doll from branches and talking to it. In the morning, the bath is ready. For the first time in many days, people bathe in hot water and wash their clothes. And the guys find a strange stone on the riverbank, which Yamamoto learns about. He sends his people to find it, but Rennie notices strangers, and one of the guys lets slip that according to their leader, this stone might help them return home. The girls argue about the need to return, and Rennie pushes Katana away. She falls and accidentally shifts a layer of soil, under which a dead body is discovered. Meanwhile, Tanaka reads in a newspaper an announcement about the search for a murderer in his description. At that time, Rennie and Katana are attacked by guys from the sixth carriage, but Rennie breaks free and runs to her own, where she tells about the found corpse, while Katana escapes from the guys through the forest. The fifth carriage decides to make weapons, while Shirahama and Hayashima run to the neighbors. But the girl is not there, and Katana meanwhile makes it to the boat. Yamamoto is forced to confess to the guys that he killed one of the passengers, who suddenly became aggressive and started attacking people with a knife. That's why he was recognized as a leader. The guys go home, hoping that Katana has returned, but she's not there, and the rest urge to go to the sixth carriage and punish the guilty. And the guys go again to look for the girl. Katana hides in the boat when Yamamoto comes in. He pretends to be calling an unknown station, but the girl sees that the wires are cut. The man discovers her and confesses that he doesn't want to return to the past because he intends to create a new society here. After that, he ties up Katana and locks her in the cabin, where her screams cannot be heard. In the morning, the passengers of the fifth carriage are just about to attack the neighbors when one of the women suggests backing up and looking for a building where they could hide. At this time, guys from the sixth carriage go to the neighbors to scavenge something, but they fall into traps. A fight starts when the rest of the sixth carriage's passengers arrive, and there are more men among them. The fight escalates into a real battle, which is stopped by the appearance of the escaped Katana, who accuses Yamamoto of lying. He is forced to admit to the deception, but he just wanted to keep people's spirits up. However, the passengers decide to exile the former leader. Before leaving, the man hands over a journal from the ship, which contains information about the tower that could help them return to the past. Meanwhile, those who went to search for the building reach the tower and find glowing asteroid fragments there. And in 2023, scientist Ray, after reviewing the video surveillance camera recordings, discovers that a wormhole appeared in the tunnel at the moment of the disappearance of two carriages, which apparently was the result of a distortion in the space-time continuum. The passengers study the journal found by Yamamoto and learn the exact date of the disaster. Moreover, they have an asteroid fragment that possesses a phenomenal magnetic charge. One of the passengers remembers how on the day of their departure, he saw something in the sky resembling a falling star. In the past, Ray, analyzing the same event, concludes that it was the flare from a supernova explosion. In the future, there's also an expert who explains that supernovas occur in space when a star reaches the end of its life cycle and explodes, releasing a massive amount of energy. Apparently, this created the temporal rift into which both carriages fell. It means they need to open this wormhole again. In the evening, a strong storm begins, forcing people to seek more reliable shelter than the carriage. Tanaka opens the rear doors leading into the tunnel. Unexpectedly, a strong gust snatches his doll and sucks it into the wormhole caused by the hurricane. But as soon as the storm subsides, the wormhole disappears. And in 2023, scientists find Tanaka's doll. Passengers in the future conclude that to summon the wormhole, they need a powerful energy source, for which they start looking for remnants of power lines. Digging up each post, the passengers find an electrical substation where, somehow, working equipment is preserved. They redirect enough electricity into the tunnel to stabilize the wormhole with the onset of the next storm, enough to return to the past. The storm starts at night, supported by the power of the substation. The wormhole opens, and everyone enters the carriage except Tanaka, who refused to return. The carriage is swallowed by the hole and races somewhere in space and time until its doors are opened by security service employees who say they have arrived on May 1, 2026, which means there are only a few months left before the asteroid falls. After going through quarantine procedures, the passengers tell the officials, presenting as evidence fragments of the meteorite and unusual plants from the future. Only the officials don't believe the stories about the upcoming apocalypse. Later, the internet buzzes about the incident. The time travelers find fans, which helps maintain interest in the traveler's story about the upcoming end of the world. Meanwhile, scientist Ray becomes convinced that the travelers are telling the truth, as he has also tracked the asteroid. One of the passengers posts an appeal on the internet telling ordinary people about the impending danger, and a passenger who held a high position in the government before the trip makes her way to the Minister of Defense. She listens to her former colleague and reports that the government believed them and is already preparing to launch a missile capable of altering the asteroid's trajectory to pass by Earth. Time passes, and the day of the catastrophe is about to dawn. The travelers decide to gather together on the platform to find out whether it was possible to avert the disaster, and if not, to perish together. But the military successfully completes their task and changes the meteorite's trajectory, saving humanity from total extinction. Quite an unusual series where various theories about the impending doom of humanity are mixed. And the finale of the story is very relevant, emphasizing that life on Earth is the result of the actions of each living being, and the future of the planet is a collective human responsibility.
They are heroes, and they're going to space.
In 1963, the Cold War between the USA and the USSR intensifies, and nuclear war seems inevitable. Understanding that humanity could be wiped off the face of the Earth, President John Kennedy orders the development of a secret plan to ensure humanity's survival. A group of scientists creates the spaceship Ascension and selects 600 volunteers who are sent to Proxima Centauri with the task of colonizing the planet. But the journey will take hundreds of years, meaning generations will succeed one another. 2 generations later, the ship is mainly inhabited by the grandchildren of the first astronauts, and the environment reflects the 1960s. In honor of the 51st anniversary of the launch, a grand party is held on the ship. Looking at the inhabitants, it seems the mission has been successful. People have obviously adapted to the living conditions. However, the first impression is deceptive, as social inequality exists here too. Wealthy and well-off families get good jobs and live on the upper decks, while the poor are limited in comfort. One day, a young woman named Lorelai picks up a package from the butcher and goes to swim on the artificial beach. But shortly afterward, a girl named Krista finds her lifeless body and alerts the ship with a loud scream. Despite the passing years, the chief engineer of the spaceship, who remained on Earth, is still alive. But now his place is taken by his son, Harris, who does everything to keep the Ascension project under tight security and monitors all news. Learning of Lorelai's death, Harris's assistant advises informing the project director, Catherine Warren. However, Harris fears that this could jeopardize the project and tarnish his father's legacy. Meanwhile, Dr. Juliette Bryce examines the dead body and finds strange marks on the deceased's wrists. The ship's captain, William, assigns the responsibility for investigating this case to the project executive director, Aaron Gall. He soon discovers one oddity: there is no image of Lorelai entering the beach. Later, Galt learns that Lorelai was seeing a guy named James Toback, who worked in water purification. He sets out to find him, but to no avail. On the same day, the forensic results show that Lorelai had been making love a few hours before her death. A bullet was extracted from her palate. This alarms Galt, since officially there are no weapons on board the ship. He immediately informs the captain of the news. Meanwhile, Krista has to be hospitalized, as she is shocked by the incident and says someone is watching her. But even as she begins to recover, the girl insists that there is no life in space, so they must return to Earth. She is also sure that Lorelai died because she learned something forbidden. Soon, Galt apprehends James Toback. The guy admits he saw Lorelai on the day of her death. However, she left abruptly after a quarrel, and he was not close to her that day. Galt and Toback go to the beach and start searching for clues. Suddenly, they stumble upon a hidden passageway that Lorelai apparently used, explaining her absence on the surveillance footage. Galt and Officer Duke inspect the discovered entrance and find the place where the girl was killed, as well as a book with maps of the water filtration system and blueprints of the navigation computer, which recently malfunctioned. It becomes clear that this is sabotage, intended to force the ship to return to Earth. Duke and his men descend to the lower decks, where the Butcher Stokes provokes a fight, but then an alarm sounds about an approaching powerful radiation storm. The order is given for everyone to take shelter in their capsules, but then the captain learns that the protective shields are jammed and sends Galt and an electrician to fix them. Thanks to their efforts, the door eventually closes. The electrician then confesses that he saw Stokes giving Lorelai a gun before she was killed. At the same time, Dr. Juliet puts Krista to bed and leaves her a seahorse-shaped necklace, claiming it will protect her. However, when the spaceship enters the radiation zone and everyone seals themselves in their capsules, Krista sees a strange man in a suit entering her room. After the ship safely passes through the radiation storm and everyone is allowed to exit, Galt and Duke go to the lower deck again, find a gun with Stokes, and take him into custody. The man is interrogated, but he continues to insist that he was framed because he is from the lower deck and it is easy to make him the culprit. Meanwhile, the door to Stokes' cell automatically opens. He exits and retrieves a hidden gun from his cabin. After the funeral, Galt speaks to the captain. William admits that he was close to Lorelai, but he did not kill her. It is then that Stokes appears, taking a random girl hostage. He demands a fair trial. Galt lunges at Stokes, freeing the girl. The captain quickly leads her to safety, while Stokes and Galt continue to fight. In the end, Stokes is ejected into space, but instead of instant death, he lands on an inflatable mattress where a group of people detains him. It becomes clear that the entire project is just a simulation, a test of the viability of generations of people in spaceflight. But the people on the ship believe they were sent on an important mission and have been flying in space for 51 years. Director Warren somehow learns about the recent events. Enraged, she storms into the Mission Control Center and warns Harris not to hide anything. Harris claims that Stokes is the murderer, but the director is not convinced, and she sends a consultant named Samantha Kruger to oversee the project. At the same time, an unknown man sets a bomb in the ship's cobalt generator, which explodes after some time. Harris and Kruger rush into the facility housing the spaceship. Fortunately, there are no reports of casualties, and the injured are taken to the medical center. Captain William inspects the explosion site and discovers graffiti on the wall, confirming it was a deliberate act. But fearing accusations of incompetence, he conceals the true cause. Outside, Kruger demands access to the surveillance footage. On the ship, Galt goes to the lower decks to meet with the person responsible for the generators, named Dwight, but he panics and attacks the director. Regaining consciousness, Galt continues the investigation and learns that the explosion that killed his parents 20 years ago was similar to the recent one. He hypothesizes that Dwight was likely involved in Lorelai's murder because Stokes didn't know how to use a gun, therefore he couldn't have killed the girl. Harris and his assistant learn that the other side of the deck is no longer airtight, and the team inside can hear sounds from outside. This creates a risk of exposure. Galt finds Dwight and a fight ensues, during which Dwight somehow manages to escape and start a bomb timer. Alarmed, Harris orders everyone to leave the area immediately. Fortunately, Galt manages to defuse the bomb, but Dwight dies. Kruger blames Harris for this, but he argues the goal of the project is to determine human capabilities. However, later Harris gives Dr. Juliet's necklace to his wife, indicating that he was the one who broke into Krista's room and stole the necklace. At the same time, Kruger begins her own investigation and discovers that several scientists involved in the Ascension project were found dead or went missing in the 1960s. Meanwhile, on the ship, everyone prepares for the next round of vaccinations, but Krista refuses the shot, convinced that they want to kill her. The librarian volunteers to take the shot instead, but after receiving the medication, she loses consciousness. Kruger demands an explanation, but Harris insists that these are routine immunizations and is concerned for the girl who didn't get the shot. He orders the medicine to be added to milk, but Krista figures out his plan and pours it out. Kruger meets with Eva, the author of a website tracking the fates of 1960s scientists. Eva claims the government used the project as a cover to abduct children for participation. Later, an unknown man pursues Krista and tries to forcibly vaccinate her, but he injures himself and stains the girl's dress with his blood, allowing her to escape. Galt takes her to Dr. Juliet and convinces her to get the shot. While preparing, Krista tells Dr. Robert Bryce about visions she's had lately. These include falling from a twin tower, a war in the desert, and tragedies in the ocean. She also claims to have seen Dr. Bryce in the maintenance tunnel where Lorelai was killed. The doctor becomes enraged, gags her, and administers the shot. Harris and his assistant who saw this are shocked that Krista described events that actually happened on Earth. Dr. Bryce finds a blood sample match from Krista's dress with his wife's student, Mesmer. However, the boy is found dead in his cabin. Kruger concludes that Harris has an accomplice on the ship who is causing disturbances and radiation storms. On the ship, the day of the lottery arrives, allowing the winning couple to have a child. Since population numbers must be strictly maintained, a new person can only appear after someone's death. And now 3 people have died. Soon the names are announced. Among the winners are Officer Duke and his wife. Krista notices a woman outside her cabin and follows her, but suddenly she realizes it's the ghost of Lorelei. At that moment, someone starts playing a video showing her tryst with Captain William. Everyone in the room laughs while Krista starts screaming uncontrollably. Harris observes this and notices that the girl began reacting even before the video played, as if she could see the future. He is amazed. His father predicted this phenomenon in 3 generations and called it morphic resonance. Kruger steals the keys to Stokes' cell, later presenting a report sharply criticizing Harris, prompting director Warren to come to the project. While Kruger sneaks into Stokes' cell, he attacks her and takes her hostage, and there he learns the truth about the Ascension project. This shocks Stokes, leading to a mental breakdown. However, Kruger persuades him that they must escape before they are noticed and killed. She is willing to help him because the entire project is unethical. As they step outside, Stokes cries, but Kruger urges him to pull himself together. A guard approaches them, and they team up to neutralize him. In the process, Kruger gets injured. Stokes goes to the nearest store to buy medical supplies. They then go to a motel together. Warren and Harris learn about the escape and call security from the company TC, which turns out to have funded the project. The management is unhappy with the director's work and accuses Harris of covering up facts. Harris panics and begs Warren for a second chance, but it is in vain. On the ship, Duke learns that Galt has started investigating his wife, suspecting her of killing Lorelei. He loses his temper and confronts Galt. At the same time, Krista has another vision. She foresees a violent fight between Duke and Galt and runs to the beach. Anxious, she unintentionally uses telekinesis. However, she loses control of her power and shuts down all the ship's electricity. Warren blames Harris for the incident and orders her henchmen to get rid of him. Terrified, Harris talks about morphic resonance. It turns out that Warren has long awaited this result. They rush to the control center and learn that all the ship's systems shut down due to a power surge, but the artificial stars still shine. Harris's father embedded the starlights in the ship's nuclear reactor to ensure the illusion's eternity. Harris suggests using the nuclear reactor to restore the system's functionality. Meanwhile, Toback receives a weak TV signal and informs Dr. Bryce. However, the latter sends the guy away under a flimsy pretext, then turns off the screen. It becomes clear that he is Harris's accomplice. Kruger meets with Eva and explains everything to her. She plans to flee abroad and seek asylum before exposing the project's deceit. Eva tries to dissuade her, and Kruger realizes that the journalist also works for the TC company. Eva confesses everything and shoots Kruger. Stokes manages to escape. The oxygen on the ship begins to run out. Captain William and Galt go to the lower decks to activate the carbon dioxide scrubbers and declare a radiation storm for the others to conserve oxygen. Harris concludes that the chances of getting the ship back to working condition are extremely low, so Warren decides to extract Krista before she suffocates. William and Galt realize the scrubbers are beyond repair, so they decide to clean the air manually. Krista senses someone coming to take her. Dr. Bryce confirms this, and when Krista accuses him of killing Lorelei, he confesses. The woman learned about the fake mission, and he couldn't allow the exposure. Galt and William successfully distribute lithium dioxide throughout the ship using large fans, restoring oxygen levels. At that moment, Warren's envoy arrives, and Dr. Bryce tries to stop him, but the brute easily brushes him aside and grabs Krista. Galt sees Lorelei's ghost, who leads him to Krista. It turns out he has also developed resonance. Galt attacks the thug. Krista uses her power again, making the opponents dissolve into thin air. Seeing all this, Warren panics and tries to contact the envoy by radio. She moves closer to the ship, and Harris takes advantage of the moment to push her down, killing her. Galt finds himself on an unknown planet. The idea is generally good, especially for fans of detective fiction, and one can't help but wonder, what if Earth is the same kind of spaceship, and all the people on the planet are participants in an experiment? In the future, a time comes when women are offered a unique opportunity to conceive and give birth to a child using mobile artificial wombs in the form of eggs. Don't say a bob. Say a baby. You are completely tuned to the odd, near future scenario. A young woman wakes up in her apartment. Her home AI immediately activates the coffee maker and informs Rachel of the good news about the improvement in her digestive health. It suggests an appropriate outfit for the day and reminds her of her visit to the capsule center. Rachel wakes up her husband, Elvie, to wish him a good morning and say goodbye before heading to work. The AI now advises Elvie on his outfit for the day and informs him that his happiness index has slightly increased. He receives a prepared breakfast and heads to the home greenhouse. Meanwhile, Rachel arrives at work, where today there is a presentation of a new generation of cognitive assistants called our machines, which are soon to become new cognitive supervisors. After the meeting, Rachel is invited by her supervisor, who is concerned about the possibility of her expanding her family, as they intend to offer her a promotion. Additionally, the corporation is willing to provide funding for the services of the Uterus Center, which Rachel appreciates. Following this, Rachel continues her workday when she receives a call from the uterus. There have been changes in their lists, and a spot has opened up which the center can offer her. They schedule a visit, and Rachel settles into a relaxing chair, dreaming about her future child. During this time, her husband conducts a class in the botanical garden, where he shows students a fig fruit that he managed to grow naturally. He offers the young people a taste, but they view the fruit with disgust. Finally, one brave soul tries it. Meanwhile, Rachel shares the joyful news with her colleague and friend Alice and confesses that she hasn't told her husband about her visit to the center. Because of this, she has to consult her robot psychoanalyst, to whom she admits that her husband is very distant from her, as he is fixated on the natural world, which translates into his desire to have a child conceived, carried, and born naturally. The AI seeks an answer to the question of why this child would be considered natural, while one gestated in a capsule would not. What distinguishes them? And Rachel is at a loss, unable to find the differences. Later, she and her friend go out for lunch, and while inhaling the pleasant aromas, Rachel agrees that she should talk to her husband about everything. She finds her husband watching a relaxing program, and he talks about his day. Elvie is disheartened by the fact that the younger generation doesn't know how to interact with nature because no one taught them. At some point, people decided that nature was just a commodity, and that's when everything began to fall apart. The next day, Rachel goes to the Uterus Center, where she and others discuss how, when the birth rate dropped to 0, their newly established center took on the task of solving the problem. Women didn't want to have children because it was inconvenient for them. The center wants them to live full lives and pursue their dreams without being distracted by children. The director of the center, Linda, welcomes the gathering and is ready to share the latest technological advancements. Humans have always managed to control nature, so why shouldn't women take control of childbirth? Linda gives a tour of the center, showing the capsule developed by scientists in which the baby grows. If parents don't have time to interact, they can always play music, audiobooks, or educational podcasts for the baby. Through an app, they can feed the child and monitor its development. One significant advantage is that children in the capsule are not exposed to viruses or toxins. The capsules operate autonomously for 48 hours. The fetus inside can hear everything happening around, so it's advisable for the mother to talk to the baby. After the discussion, Linda reminds Rachel of the need to make a deposit, but Rachel intends to talk to her husband first. Upon returning home, she confesses her intention to Elvie to have a child with the help of the Uterus Center, which upsets him. Not only did she make such an important decision on her own, but she also went to the center without him. Rachel apologizes, and the couple reconciles. Rachel suggests to Elvie that they talk to Alice and her husband, and the family goes to visit them. Alice enthusiastically discusses the opportunity for women to have a child without experiencing pain, suffering, or body changes. Meanwhile, her husband demonstrates a special belt for carrying the egg capsule, to which Elvie looks quite skeptical. He categorically refuses to hold the capsule. At home, he can't shake the feeling that the egg is made of plastic. Rachel assures him that the child will perceive it as a real maternal womb, but Elvie remains unwavering. It's hard for him to accept that the child will be packaged in plastic. The wife suggests that he visit her robot psychotherapist. Although he initially takes offense at this advice, he eventually decides to go. However, after listening to the AI's advice, the man realizes that they completely misunderstand each other. Upon returning home and discussing the evolution that led humanity to grow children in capsules, he agrees to his wife's proposal because he understands how important it is to her. The next day they go to the center, and although now a child can be made from any material, Rachel announces that Elvie will be the biological father. She allows nature to determine the child's gender. Linda leads them to a room where on a large screen, future parents can witness the moment of conception. Later, they are brought a container with a fertilized zygote so they can admire it. The couple later informs Rachel's parents about the upcoming event. Rachel's father suggests that Elvie sell his countryside house since they never go there, but the man vehemently opposes the idea. While the capsule remains at the center, the future parents continue their usual lives. The day comes when the program connects Rachel to the capsule, and even though nothing can be heard from inside yet, she starts selecting music for the baby. At one point, she tries to see the baby, but she is told that it is kept in complete darkness until 7 weeks. Then one of the capsules sends a signal. It's time for birth. Even though everything is programmed, the baby doesn't always arrive at the appointed time. Soon Rachel starts having strange dreams, which she confides to her psychoanalyst, but the AI convinces her that dreams are unreliable material for analysis. After 6 weeks of pregnancy, when the baby's heartbeat is detectable, Linda allows them to take the capsule home. For the first time, she shows them the baby. On that day, Rachel prepares the kids' room, and Elvie brings an olive tree sapling. However, his wife suggests replacing it with a hologram, and the offended husband takes the tree away, promising to plant it in their countryside house, which Rachel once again suggests selling. She just doesn't understand why they should go somewhere when they have everything for a good life here, but Elvie refuses to raise the child among plastic. The next day, Rachel meets a pregnant woman in the pool who allows her to listen to her baby's movements, filling her with delight. In the evening, she moves the capsule to their bedroom because they want to spend as much time as possible with the future child. However, Elvie feels uncomfortable with intimacy while the baby is present, so they move the capsule to baby's room. It immediately signals hunger, and the parents rush to feed their offspring. Sometime later, they go on a tour to the center to prepare for parenting. Linda shows prospective parents the play areas where children play and answers their questions. The government no longer funds education, but the center teaches programming and logic to the little ones. In one of the rooms, children engage in creative activities, or rather, a computer does the work, and the children provide feedback. One of the parents asked about the dreams the children have, but Linda reassures him. Dreams are excluded from the fetal development program because they do not carry any useful information. One day, Elvie is in his greenhouse when he hears the capsule's signal. He feeds the baby, but then decides to communicate with it, while Rachel receives a warning about her declining productivity. Her husband is trying on the capsule holder and takes pride in his success. Now he carries the capsule with him, reading books to the baby, posing riddles, showing his plants, and falling asleep beside it. At work, he suggests to the visitors to hug a tree and experience its calming effect on the human mind. His supervisor congratulates him on the upcoming joyful event and suggests replacing the live plants in the greenhouse with holographic images, as growing real trees is too expensive, but Elvie becomes furious and rejects the proposal. At home, the family watches a movie about penguins, and the man starts crying when he learns about the dedication of the birds. Worried, Rachel suggests returning the capsule to the center, as other parents do. That's when Elvie reveals that he brought the capsule to work. Rachel shares this with her colleagues. She is concerned about her husband's close interaction with the egg. However, the women encourage her to be happy about it. After all, the father is immediately bonding with the future child. Rachel continues to have strange dreams, and her pregnant friend reassures her that it's normal for expectant mothers. One day, Rachel dreams of herself with a baby bump, and she enjoys it. The woman also begins to devote all her attention to the capsule, especially after Elvie's mother sent them an old book about the benefits of parental closeness. But this starts to worry Rachel, and the couple goes to a psychoanalyst. Finding a balance is challenging because everything revolves around the child. Rachel is jealous of Elvie because he spends more time with the baby than she does. After all, she is the mother and should feel the baby. After listening to their argument, the AI asks for permission to connect to the capsule because it cannot take sides. The next day, Rachel takes the capsule to work. However, she behaves distractedly, giving the baby too much attention. Alice suggests placing the egg in a specially designated area where other future mothers' capsules are stored because Rachel is becoming a distracting mother. Alice's capsule is kept at the center because it's more convenient for her. In the evening, Rachel, taking the capsule, hurries to the center for a parenting seminar, after which Linda suggests leaving the baby in the incubation area. The family reluctantly complies with the demand. The house becomes empty, and both the husband and wife miss their capsule. One day, Rachel dreams of a seaside where she walks with the baby in her arms. She wakes up in tears and moves Elvie's little tree to the kids' room, surprising her husband. Meanwhile, at work, her boss is not entirely satisfied with her productivity, but Rachel assures her that everything is fine. Later, Linda informs them that the delivery day will be next Wednesday, as deliveries now occur on the 39th week. They can't afford babies being born earlier or later, as the capsules are in high demand. Parents must receive oxytocin, the love hormone, to prepare for the baby's arrival. However, the family shocks the director with a request to allow them to take the capsule home before delivery, even though it goes against the rules. Moreover, important personality development seminars are held every day. Linda suggests they take special tablets to regulate the baby's sleep, which greatly helps parents. The couple leaves, passing through protesting women against the capsules. Suddenly, Elvie returns and, taking advantage of the midwife being occupied with another patient, retrieves his capsule without permission. That night, Rachel dreams that she is buying her baby at a store, and they offer her a deal, 2 for the price of 1. Upon waking up, she wakes her husband and asks him to take her to their countryside home to give birth in nature. Elvie rushes to the center and informs Linda that they intend to give birth at home. However, the director is strongly against it. The capsule is very expensive and they cannot take risks, so they must return the egg as soon as possible. Nevertheless, the family leaves for their coastal home. Rachel enjoys the surrounding nature, starting to understand her husband. They walk in the forest together and plant an olive tree. They often sit by the sea with the capsule until one night it turns off. In a panic, Rachel suggests calling the center, but her husband reminds her that they still have 48 hours and they must trust the child. They are awakened by the onset of labor, requiring a code to be entered, but they can't figure it out. So Elvie grabs a hammer. He opens the capsule and retrieves a beautiful, healthy baby. The happy parents embrace him. Early in the morning, Rachel puts the capsule in a box, takes it to the post office, and sends it back to the center. She then returns home where her husband and son are sleeping on the bed. The creators of the film portrayed the absurdity of a possible social evolution quite delicately. Nothing terrible happened. People just became so lazy that they forgot about the joys of life. Why go out of town when you can visit a capsule garden where you lie down and inhale the scents of the forest? And why go through the process of pregnancy and subject your body to stress? After all, there's the capsule. In 2025, aliens occupy Earth and first enclose cities with 300-meter walls to limit human movement. Welcome to day 348 of our occupation. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. One day, truck driver Will bids farewell to his wife Katie and their children, Grace and Bram, and drives to work through the streets of Los Angeles, patrolled by soldiers in red helmets. Later, from his conversation with a colleague, it becomes clear that Will is planning an illegal trip beyond the wall. He reaches a smuggler who places him in a metal box and covers it with ice. That's when Will discovers he has a fellow passenger, to whom he reveals he's looking for his 12-year-old son left behind the wall. Soon the vehicle enters through the gates. Then an explosion occurs, flipping the truck over. Dazed, Will crawls out only to be captured by the red helmets. That same morning, Katie goes to an underground dealer for forbidden insulin. By restricting medicine, the invaders weed out the weak, making it very hard to obtain. She presents a bottle of alcohol for trade, but finds the insulin spoiled. She has to fight her way out with a pistol, risking drone detection and death for all. But Katie can't afford to be robbed. Meanwhile, Will is imprisoned, unable to call his wife. Katie is indeed worried, as walking the streets at night is prohibited. Then her sister Maddie arrives with her son, who needs the insulin. Katie assures she will find the medication and asks to stay with the children. She goes to her husband's colleague, who lies about not knowing Will's whereabouts. Katie has to return home empty-handed. Suddenly, an alarm blares over the city. Katie hides under a military truck parked at the curb. A drone hovers above just as a prisoner is shoved into the vehicle. Just when Katie seems doomed, the truck starts moving and the drone flies away. The woman makes it home. In the morning, she visits her friend Bruce Sard and reports Will's disappearance. It turns out he, like her husband, was with the FBI before the aliens arrived. He asked her to return home while he checks his remaining contacts, but Katie goes to the hospital, where she learns of the explosion at the city's entrance. Amidst the chaos, she sneaks into a storeroom and steals several vials of insulin. In prison, Will hears his cellmate's confessions, soon to be sent to work at a factory for the aliens. Then soldiers arrive, one shouting Will's real surname. He's recognized and taken to the Green Zone, where the world's leaders now reside. There, he's met by Snyder, a representative of the Los Angeles governor. Snyder knows Will's military and FBI background and his knack for catching dangerous criminals. Since the military and police vanished after the aliens' arrival, Will had to hide, but now Snyder needs his help, offering his family full protection in return. The Masters demand security, so Will lead a special unit, infiltrate the rebels, and capture their leader Geronimo. As the alien spacecraft is about to launch, Snyder takes Will to the balcony, hoping to persuade him to switch sides. If he refuses, his family will be sent to the factory. At night, the Red Helmets bring Will home, frightening his family, but he reassures them, explaining he was just in an accident. However, Katie realizes her husband is lying. Hearing he went to look for Charlie, she cries, but the news of Snyder's proposal enrages her. She would never become the wife of a traitor. In the morning, the family is woken up by the smell of bacon, and upon entering the kitchen, they find Snyder there. He has prepared breakfast and even brewed coffee, which is now impossible to find. As he eats, he lists all the benefits of their new status: security, a personal tutor for the children, good food and work. Moreover, the aliens allow the couple to reopen their old bar. However, Will is only willing to agree in exchange for the return of his son, who is in another block. Snyder promises to consider this option. The next morning, Katie arrives at an unassuming house where members of the resistance, whom she informs that the occupiers have hired her husband to find them, await her. The following morning, Will goes to work, quickly realizing that Snyder deceived him. Instead of becoming the commander of a special unit, he is subordinated to Phyllis, who assigns him to find the guy who planted an explosive device at the city entrance. He is partnered with Bo, an old policeman. Meanwhile, Katie arrives at her bar and finds her lost son's belongings. Broussard interrupts her cleaning, wanting to know what the police have found out about the explosion at the customs, but Will has just started his job and has no information yet. Meanwhile, Will and Bo approach the house where the girlfriend of the wanted criminal lives, and by deception, they force him to run out the back door. The agent catches up with him when suddenly a drone appears. Will fearlessly looks directly into the lens, and it instantly disappears. The police bring the detainee to the station, where Will's arrested colleague is found. The man begs Phyllis to release him as his informant, but she refuses. Then Will goes to his trailer, but his family is no longer there because the woman and child are entering his house at that moment. After hiding the mother and son upstairs, Katie drives to Broussard as the couple needs new documents, but he refuses to help, as the resistance cannot take risks. Katie leaves. At home, she confronts Will, who, learning that his friend's family is with him, takes them to a man who makes fake documents. On their way, they are stopped by the Red Helmets. However, after checking the pass, they let him go with apologies, leaving Katie in a state of shock. They safely arrive at the Masters, and while he makes the documents, Will tells Katie that he caught the guy who planted the bomb. And once he finds Geronimo, they will be able to bring Charlie back. Later, Will takes the woman and child to a camp where displaced people live. Katie meets with the resistance leader. Alexander calms her down, as the caught boy belongs to another group, but he promises to warn them. At the station, Will discovers that a group of prisoners is being prepared for shipment to the factory. Phyllis asks him to resign himself. During the arrival, the city's entire defense was destroyed in 8 hours. What can a bunch of rebels do? At night, Katie comforts her distraught husband when he is informed that the suspect has divulged the location of his accomplice's hideout. He leaves, and Katie rushes to the phone to warn Broussard. Meanwhile, the prisoners are brought to the location, forced to strip, disinfected, and then redressed. At the same time, the Red Helmets arrive at the location named by the detainee and find only the bodies of rebels. Will realizes that there is a spy among the police. The next morning, a man with a card enters an inconspicuous house on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Immediately, a radio broadcast begins with calls to overthrow the occupation, voiced by Geronimo. The Red Helmets detect the transmission and head to the location. At the same time, Bram duplicates the broadcast recording and hides the cassettes under the bed, but the military, storming into the house, find no one there. That same day, Katie participates in a resistance armed attack on a food truck for the first time. During the operation, one of their comrades, Kim, is fatally wounded. Katie tries to help him, but Broussard finishes the boy off, shocking Katie. Then, drones arrive and start shooting random passers-by. However, Broussard calculates the authorities' response time to the incident. After the operation, Katie rushes home and barely manages to wash off the blood traces. She is so shaken that she doesn't want to explain anything and locks herself in her room. That day at school, Bram gives a cassette to his teacher, who notices a change in the pattern of the alien ship's takeoffs. He saw a very large object circling Earth in the sky and now intends to make a more powerful telescope. The police arrive at the scene of the incident. Will notices the body of a boy who was clearly finished off. Phyllis orders to take his photo and quickly learns his name. After that, the Red Helmets go to his house and arrest his parents. Will is outraged by this and fails to notice Broussard in the crowd, who heads to the resistance base and reports what happened. But Alexander is confident that Kim left no traces. Will then goes home, where Katie explains her morning behavior with the things found in the bar belonging to their son. Distraught, Will blames himself for being powerless against the Masters, but his wife promises her support. Later, Katie goes to meet Broussard. He justifies his actions as saving Kim from torture, but now she needs to extract everything her husband learned during the investigation from him. At the same time, Bram's friend asks for his help and leads the boy to an underground tunnel beneath the wall, where her brother slipped and injured his leg. It turns out their father worked there before the arrival, and now they use the tunnel to get beyond the wall. Will and Bo go to a cultural center, listed among the places visited by the deceased Kim, and find a rebel weapons cache. At the same time, Bram's friends tell him they've been going to the other side for 6 months to get food, as there's no one beyond the wall. Alexander learns about the lost weapons and asks Broussard to warn Katie about the inadmissibility of her husband's actions. He fulfills this request, but Katie is more concerned about her family's safety. Nevertheless, in the evening, she opens the bar to visitors. Suddenly, in the midst of the festivities, Snyder walks in. The man congratulates everyone on the opening of the establishment and then explains to Will that by revitalizing such places, the Masters allow people to safely release tension. Hearing this, Katie becomes furious, thinking they've sold out to the aliens for the sake of getting their son back. But Will is convinced that by continuing to work for Snyder, he will be able to find Charlie. Later, he speaks with Bo again about the spy. However, the former policeman, who has faced betrayal, doesn't believe in such a possibility. Meanwhile, Katie tells Broussard that the quick finding of the Resistance's premises is explained by a huge database in a woman who knows how to use it. She's ready to reveal her name if Will remains unharmed. Broussard swears to this. The next day, a squad of Red Helmets bursts into the school. The military brutally arrest a teacher and beat a student. Returning to the base, one of them removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Broussard. Later, he explains to Alexander that he learned the duty schedule of the Red Helmets. Now they have a chance to be in the right place at the right time. That same day, Phyllis shows Will information about the Los Angeles rebels. If they unite and go on the offensive, the entire block will be cleaned out. She hopes Will understands what this means for him and his family and counts on his loyalty. Meanwhile, Katie takes the children for a walk with Lindsay, the governess appointed by the authorities, and turns on the streetlight, sending a prearranged signal. The sound of breaking glass is heard. The woman counts to 10, then pulls out a fire extinguisher. Only after extinguishing the fire does she call emergency services. The Red Helmets in Will arrive. He is outraged to find that his house is being searched, but such is the protocol. Katie is asked to go to Phyllis for interrogation. She promises the family enhanced security. Moreover, the neighbors are warned that if something happens to them, they will be held responsible. Katie is shocked, as now they will be feared. Phyllis interrogates her about everything, even the personal relationship between husband and wife. Meanwhile, Maddie goes to the Commission for the Preservation of Cultural and Artistic Items in search of work and introduces herself to Charlotte, the director, hoping to become her assistant. After his wife's interrogation, Will confronts Phyllis, but she shows him tapes found under Bram's bed and advises him to keep a closer eye on his son. For now, she'll hold on to these pieces of evidence. Furious, Will drives home, and after a tough conversation, Bram shows his father posters. Their appearance in the city signals the release of a new broadcast by Geronimo. Katie manages to extract a promise from Alexander not to touch her husband, and in return identifies her husband's boss, Phyllis, in a photo. Later, another broadcast by Geronimo begins in the city. This time, the police immediately detect the signal coming from the library and rush there. The man hears their approach but utters his final words, calling for resistance. He is arrested, although Will is sure it's not Geronimo, greatly disappointing Snyder, who had already informed the masters of their victory. That same day, Maddie witnesses Charlotte's anger, who needs a painting by a specific artist. Maddie reports she knows who had collections in the city, as she worked as an art historian. Meanwhile, the arrested man confesses during interrogation that he found the text for the broadcast in a pipe. The police go to the site and verify that the indicated pipe leads to the green zone. Charlotte's workers find art items in the house Maddie mentioned. In gratitude, the owner takes her on board and promises to help with insulin. That same day, Phyllis informs Will that as a sign of trust, she destroyed the tapes. The man goes home where Bram admits he listened to Geronimo because he was the only one who instilled hope in people. Katie arrives at the bar earlier than usual and finds Phyllis in the hall, who wants to talk to her alone. Phyllis talks about her husband and draws parallels with Will, who loves his wife so much that he doesn't see who she really is. She shows surveillance photos from the truck attack site and warns Katie that she's gotten involved with the wrong people. If Katie wants to survive, she will now work for her. After the conversation, Phyllis returns home, where her paralyzed husband lies. She greets him, but upon entering the living room, she finds Broussard there. Phyllis immediately understands why he came and asks him to kill her husband too. Broussard shoots. The next day, Beau and Will go to the crime scene and find the word Geronimo written on the wall. Snyder is furious because Phyllis was very close to the masters and demands the criminal be found. A message comes in about the capture of one of the Geronimo group. Will interrogates the young man, who gives an address in the green zone. The Red Helmets burst in there, finding a concealed room and several people who call themselves the Geronimo group. Meanwhile, Bram, accompanied by his girlfriend, passes under the wall and ends up in a deserted city, where they find necessary supplies in a huge warehouse. Back in Los Angeles, news is broadcast that the underground has been eliminated, although Will doesn't believe it. Snyder once again becomes enraged because he sees that the captured couple doesn't look like terrorists. He refuses to fulfill the agreement about searching for Charlie and appoints Will as the head of the group. Will immediately begins searching for the mole, and Phyllis's assistant, Jennifer, reminds him of his wife, suggesting he might be the source of the leak. Returning home, Will sees Bram giving his sister markers brought from beyond the wall, but the son lies that he traded them for oranges. Snyder interrogates a man who claimed to be Geronimo, but he confesses that he is just an actor. Snyder convinces him to play out his role in exchange for being sent to another block. At the same time, Bram rushes to his teacher and promises to get him a powerful lens for his telescope. Will, secretly from his wife, searches the bar but finds nothing incriminating except for a book he doesn't recognize. The trial of Geronimo is broadcast on all channels, featuring relatives of the terrorism victims, and a scaffold for execution is erected in the square. The actor plays his role, believing Snyder's promises to eradicate terrorism. He realizes he's been deceived only when he finds himself on the scaffold, but can do nothing about it. Immediately after the execution, Snyder invites Will to join him, promising to show him something unusual. At the same time, Alexander's group prepares for a new attack, with Katie among the rebels. On the way, Will expresses his outrage to Snyder, who achieved nothing by executing the actor, but Snyder reminds him of the need to pacify the population and that he's bought time to search for the real Geronimo. Snyder's car moves through the city, guarded by a group of Red Helmets, including Broussard. At one of the turns, a decoy road worker sends them on a detour, and when the convoy slows down, Broussard shoots his colleagues. Snyder tries to run, but Will locks the doors as the car is armored. Rebels, disguised in Red Helmets uniforms, shoot at the car and manage to pull the door off, but Will shoots from inside and still gets Snyder out of the fire. Drones appear, but the rebels manage to escape. Will leads Snyder into the bar, where Katie arrives at the same time. Snyder is hysterical, but Will cannot guarantee protection by his own means. Katie asks Will in private not to risk himself for such a worthless person, but Will cannot leave a person without help. Realizing that the phone doesn't work, he goes outside to a payphone to call for backup. Meanwhile, Alexander, learning about Will's role in saving Snyder, is furious, but then Katie communicates via radio that the traitor is in the bar. She returns to Snyder and keeps the conversation going to lower his guard. He boasts about being a professor of economics, which earned him a high position. He mentions there are 7 more colonies, but he doesn't know what happens beyond them. Will returns, announcing that he has managed to call for reinforcement and it's on its way. Katie bandages Will's wound, and he confesses that Geronimo is a collective image, not one person. Katie asks not to interfere with Snyder's killing, but Will reminds her that another will take his place. Then, Snyder reveals that his people have found their son, and he is currently negotiating Charlie's return. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. They hide Snyder in the bathroom. Broussard enters in a red helmet's uniform and searches the place. Katie leads him to the basement, asking to ensure Will's safety, but he can't guarantee anything as her husband is always diving into the fray. Broussard eventually leaves, but Will is sure he is a member of the resistance and will return with backup. They barricade the doors with Snyder, who again mentions Charlie, infuriating Katie as she's tired of his blackmail. Meanwhile, the rebels try to break into the bar, but fail. A frightened Snyder tells Will that the masters have tested virtually every person, thus filtering out those they don't need, but he has never seen the aliens himself. As the rebels continue to press, Will orders Katie to hide, readying himself to defend Snyder. Then a smoke grenade is thrown in, and the militants storm in. Will opens fire. When one of the rebels finds Will, Katie shoots him, but Broussard aims at her, and her husband forces her to drop the weapon. The rebel herds them into the basement and leaves. However, Will finds a machine gun and chases after him, but by the time he gets upstairs, everyone is gone. Then, the real red helmets arrive and pull Snyder from the closet where Will had hidden him. In the evening, Will tries to reassure Katie, explaining that Snyder's tribunal was just a farce. There is no people's hero, and those who attacked them have no relation to Geronimo. Meanwhile, Alexander concludes that Katie is a double agent, simply leading them on. Meanwhile, Maddie starts a relationship with Charlotte's husband, Nolan, who is the leader of the New Age Preacher Church. At the same time, Will identifies Broussard by photo, having seen him among the attackers, and receives an order to find and arrest him. The Red Helmets head to his address, but when they begin to storm the house, it explodes. Will questions Broussard's squadmates, and one mentions a distinctive feature, a tattoo on the chest, which Will recognizes as a Special Forces sign. Broussard infiltrates a restricted area, where he steals the corpse of a dark-skinned man of similar age and build. Along with Alexander, they place it in a car and burn it. Throughout, the leader convinces Broussard of Katie's betrayal. Later, the police find a burnt car with a charred body inside, matching the description of the bar attacker, but Will once again doubts everything. Katie tries to contact the underground, but can't manage to do so. Finally, she finds an encrypted message with the name of a meeting place, where a car with Broussard at the wheel awaits her. Meanwhile, Will's assistant Jennifer finds in the database 14 people with Broussard's face, and he realizes that Broussard is not just a military man, but a former FBI agent. Broussard takes Kate out of the city and asks her difficult questions, as she shot one of her own, but Katie reminds him that she laid out one main condition from the start: her family must be untouchable. She joined the fight and served the cause faithfully. He doubts her loyalty. She leaves, unwilling to continue the conversation. Broussard goes to one of the resistance members, Rachel, and tells her about Alexander's order to eliminate Katie and how he couldn't go through with it. Will arrives at Snyder's in the Green Zone and reports that Broussard is called something entirely different, and he's very skilled in his field, but he'll definitely find him. In response, Snyder gives him an envelope containing a recent photo of Charlie. Will brings it to Katie, and through tears she asks her husband to rid themselves of Snyder's control. He promises to do so when he is ready. Meanwhile, Charlotte learns about Maddie and Nolan's relationship and threatens to fire her. Nolan decides to remind his wife of her place and offers Maddie to become his assistant. The police receive new information, with which Will goes home. He shows his wife a photo of Broussard and tells her that his fingerprints were found in their bar. This means he was there before. Katie says she doesn't know him, but Will shows her photos of his victims, and she recalls that he indeed visited them and said he lived in his mother's house and was fixing it. Jennifer immediately finds Broussard's mother's house through receipts from construction stores. Rachel comes to Katie, confessing that Broussard indeed killed many, but it's part of the resistance. Katie reminds her that she almost became one of his victims, but Rachel reminds her that Broussard didn't carry out that order. Then Katie calls Broussard and warns him that Will has figured him out. The Red Helmets go to Broussard's mother's house, but it's empty. The abandoned tools make it clear he received a warning. Will calls out to a neighbor who turns out to be Alexander, and he says he hasn't seen his neighbor. Will leaves but then stops. On Broussard's table lies the same book as in his wife's bar. Will's partner ends up at a factory where people often get sick and die. It turns out the factories are built on the moon. Will shows his children a photo of Charlie and admits he only started working for the government to get him back. That morning, the governor of the Los Angeles block arrives at Snyder's to inform him that the chief minister of the Pacific region is coming for an inspection. He assures everything is going well, but the woman is very doubtful. Katie goes to Rachel and learns that her underage sons are also in the resistance. She is stunned by the woman's courage, but still announces her departure from the group, fearing for her family. Rachel promises her support. Alexander calls Will and declares that his wife is the mole leaking information to the rebels. He sets up a meeting place. Will goes there. He immediately recognizes Broussard's neighbor, who confesses that he is the head of the cell and is willing to betray everyone for the right to leave the block. Meanwhile, Broussard meets with the leader of the youth cell of the rebels, from whom he receives information about the arrival of an important person. Will returns to Beau and tells him everything. Later he goes to Snyder and conveys Alexander's conditions. Snyder demands a personal meeting. In the evening, Katie returns to the topic of Charlie. If Snyder knows where he is, why can't he bring him back? But the conversation shifts to the meeting with Alexander. He reveals he is ready to betray the entire cell, and Katie immediately leaves for the bar, signaling Broussard along the way. Bram and his teacher observe the moon and notice changes in its surface. It seems that's where the alien mines and warehouses are located. That evening, Broussard comes to the bar, where Katie tells him about the leader's betrayal. He immediately goes to Alexander and starts asking questions, but Alexander demands he stop all communication with Katie and prepares for a new operation. The next day, Will takes Snyder to the meeting place with Alexander, who confesses he just wants to survive. He needs a universal pass to travel between blocks. In exchange, he gives a list of the group led by Broussard and admits they are planning an operation to eliminate the minister. He will set up a meeting for Broussard where the police will arrest him. Afterward, Will take him beyond the wall and give him the pass. Later, Broussard arrives at the designated place in the market. Rachel and Katie are also there, and upon spotting the red helmets, Katie immediately warns Broussard. A rebel throws firecrackers, causing panic, and people scatter as the military opens fire. Rachel dies, and Broussard escapes. Will goes to Alexander's house, which is under police guard, and announces the cancellation of the deal with Snyder. He is ready to let him run, but Snyder starts talking about Katie signing his death warrant. Will shoots the traitor and blames it all on Broussard. At night, people see Rachel's hanged family, and Katie promises Broussard her support. Will lets his wife know he's aware of her participation in the resistance. The following night, a spontaneous uprising occurs during which several red helmets die. Beau asserts that people's patience has run out. Will informs Snyder that he has information about a new rebel cell located beyond the wall. Apparently, there exists an unknown passage to the authorities. He asks for permission to let them go beyond the wall and check. Snyder agrees but assigns them a guard. Meanwhile, Broussard and Katie go to the leader of the youth cell, who proposed a joint attack on the minister. Everything is to happen in the subway, now used only by the masters. Will and Beau, having gone beyond the wall, climb a skyscraper and survey the entire city. They then simulate an attack on themselves. While their guard tries to figure out what happened, their commander finds a map supposedly lost by the attackers. Later, Will points out to Snyder the marks on the map, indicating the rebels' attack points. Snyder reports the found tunnel under the wall. Members of the youth cell show Katie a micro-drone, shaped like a bee, capable of flying anywhere and gathering any information. The rebels finalize the attack plan. Broussard teaches Katie how to shoot. At that time, red helmets led by Snyder come to Nolan's house, accusing Charlotte of hiding valuable paintings from the masters and arresting her. That evening, Katie finds a book about the benefit of the arrival, given to her daughter by Lindsay. She immediately calls Will and tells him about how the new church is indoctrinating children. Will then informs her that they will move to Beau's house, located beyond the wall, accusing her of spying on him. But Katie can no longer bear it. They constantly lie to each other, and it's killing their family, and hiding, even beyond the wall, is impossible. Will asks Beau to run alone. Katie and Broussard, killing guards, descend into the subway, open a backup entrance, and the group infiltrates inside. The rebels cause an explosion, derailing the train. Searching the wrecked wagons, people find an alien's body. Will learns about this and heads to the station, where the governor soon arrives, announcing the kidnapping of a master. There was already an incident when 2 aliens died, leading to Dallas's destruction, so people must understand what awaits Los Angeles if they don't find the missing master. At the same time, a group of rebels transports the alien to a secret location, blocking signals with metallic foil. Will rushes home and asks Maddie to hide the children. She suggests taking them to the green zone. He tries to find Katie, and Bram gives him a secret number his mother received the day before. While the rebels try to move the alien to another location, a curfew is declared in the middle of the day. Maddie and the children end up in a huge queue, and as they try to break through, Bram runs away. Meanwhile, the rebels hijack a Red Helmet's car and load the alien into it. At the same time, the police receive subway camera footage. Will recognizes Katie but doesn't show it. Bram runs to his teacher and leads him to the tunnel. Meanwhile, the group that kidnapped the alien moves through the city in a police car and witnesses a house being shot to intimidate residents. Snyder is removed from his position, but the governor can do nothing. Meanwhile, the alien is brought to a laboratory, shielded from any observation methods, and they attempt to open his suit. Will gives the rebel codebook to Jennifer. Together, they review the operation footage from Broussard's arrest attempt and identify the U-Cell leader, who is also in the database. The rebels figure out how to activate the communicator on the alien's wrist when Will knocks on the door. He asks to hand over the kidnapped and run, or he won't be able to save them, but Katie refuses to open the door, instead breaking the isolation, forcing the rebels to flee through a secret passage. At that moment, drones converge on the house. Katie opens the door, and Will calls the police. The alien is taken away. Snyder thanks him and gives him a universal pass beyond the wall. Simultaneously, Bram and the teacher descend into the tunnel and are caught by the police. Snyder is taken away by the patrol. Will goes beyond the wall to find his son, and Katie returns to an empty house. This concludes the first season. Abby and Paul move to a new house in the countryside. They really like the smart home system, including the installed cameras and the reinforced glass. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom in front of a huge window. However, one room remains unfurnished because it could become a perfect nursery. Paul unpacks boxes, sets up an antique corded phone in the living room, joking it's for when the smart home might break down. Abby arranges frames with their wedding photos. Finally, they check out the rooftop terrace, which offers a great view. Late in the evening, the couple settles on the terrace, stargazing. Abby points out constellations to her husband, who makes jokes about their names. They feel they can be happy here. In the morning, Abby goes to work at Integrate Robotics, where she works on creating domestic assistants. Upon entering, she notices footage of her boss's face, who immediately comes down to her and explains it's a new development, real-time imaging or deepfake. He escorts her to the department she will now lead. Later, he invites their family to a party and mentions a gift from the company awaiting at home. In the evening, Abby returns home, where her husband, who again couldn't find suitable work, greets her. They go to the garage, where a package for her contains a robot servant her department is working on. Paul dislikes the idea, but Abby convinces him to try living with the service for at least a week. The robot opens its eyes and introduces itself. It's Tim, standing for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. It offers to take over the passwords of home devices and personal mailboxes to save the humans time. But Abby asks to postpone this matter until tomorrow. The robot immediately demonstrates its thoughtfulness by turning on the water in the bathroom remotely. Later, it announces the arrival of a car when Abby goes downstairs, astonishing her husband with her splendid appearance. The couple gets into an autonomous car, although manual control is always an option, and heads to the party. They are greeted by a similar major domo, and drinks are served by waiters with identical faces. The boss introduces Abby to his guests, who admits her husband is not thrilled about Tim, but the boss praises the product. Tim is smart, elegant, polite, and its charge lasts for 100 years. The robot cannot lie, and knowing the code phrase, it can always be turned off. Returning home, the husband and wife engage in intimacy, eager to have children, but their passion is interrupted by Tim's appearance. Their pulse is rapid, presumably they are worried about something, and he is always ready to help. Abby finds this very funny, not getting angry at the overly attentive assistant. In the morning, their new neighbor Rose rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby as she met Paul yesterday. And when she leaves, Tim again asks for the passwords. Paul is not ready to let the computer dig through his messages, but Abby reminds him they are working on rebuilding her trust in him, and he agrees. But they still need to come up with a phrase to deactivate him. Tim suggests a set of unrelated words, and the couple agrees. Abby and Paul go about their day when a mouse gets caught in a mousetrap. Tim observes it for a while, then throws it into the grinder. In the evening, after work, the husband and wife settle in front of the TV to watch an old melodrama. Abby invites the major domo to watch the movie with them. Paul soon falls asleep, but the robot watches the film attentively, empathizing with the characters' relationships. After it ends, he asks Abby to explain what love is, and she suggests that love is about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Suddenly, the robot confesses that he would like to be loved. In the morning, Paul offers to make breakfast for his wife, but it turns out Tim has already prepared everything. Setting the utensils in front of Abby, Tim outlines her schedule for the day, then informs her that Paul has nothing to do today. In the evening, Abby returns home to find that her husband's phone is out of reach, but his last known location was 300 meters from the house. Abby goes for a run and realizes that this is Rose's house. Returning, she takes a bath, where Paul finds her. He talks about his day and how Rose asked for help, which he did. He asks his wife not to be jealous, as he loves only her. The next day, the couple visits a family planning center, hoping to get help with becoming parents. In the evening, as they prepare to go to a restaurant, Abby asks Tim for advice on her dress. He suggests wearing red, and looking at her, admits that she is beautiful because she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks him to zip up her dress, but the robot's hand fails and he accidentally tears the dress. This overwhelms him. The robot panics. Abby calms him down and wears another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals that he has been offered a job in London, but Abby strongly objects, as they decided to start over, and his long absences won't help solve their problems. The next day, she returns home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, who has made a garden project for them. Abby feels jealous, but Paul is very excited about the gifted sweater. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to do it for her, and she hears him speaking to the clinic, in her voice. Abby is amazed, as she did not know about this feature of the assistant, but Tim assures her it's for the convenience of the owners. In the evening, Paul reports that he couldn't find the new sweater, and Tim has been away all day. Then a car pulls up to the porch, and Tim, now dyed brunette, steps out, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, so he wanted to please her. Seeing Paul's irritation, the robot promises to return to his original appearance. But after the couple leaves, he spends a long time looking at their wedding photo. The next day, Abby achieves the correct functioning of the robot's hand, and the boss demands an update for all models, including those in the homes of his employees. The woman heads home and accidentally meets Rose, who suggests they walk together. Along the way, they stop at a showcase, and Rose points out a medallion in the shape of a flower she likes. But then Paul comes and takes his wife away to tell her he has found a job. Returning home, they celebrate in bed, while Tim's hands are being changed, unaware that he continuously monitors everything happening in the house. And he hears Paul again asking his wife to hand the robot over to the corporation. Returning, Tim demonstrates his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul sees. Later, the robot suddenly sits at the piano, plays Abby's favorite tune, and mentions dates when Paul bought them concert tickets, but Abby distinctly remembers being at home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring her husband's excuses. The next day, Abby comes home with a bouquet, and Tim, placing them in a vase, informs her that Paul went to see Rose. But Paul enters right then, puzzled why his wife is angry. Hearing what Tim said, the man gets furious. He had no plans to visit Rose. He tries to explain that the robot wants to separate them. The woman doesn't believe it, as Tim is just a machine. A disagreement ensues between the spouses. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant, and she puts it back, thinking Paul prepared a surprise for her. Then she heads to work. Meanwhile, the husband goes down to the kitchen, sees the clogged sink, and pulls out pieces of his new sweater from the grinder. He checks the cameras for Tim and catches him in his wife's bedroom, sniffing her dress. Paul records this moment on his phone camera and rushes to the car to catch up with Abby and show her the footage. But Paul's car mysteriously doesn't start, and the robot calls a company car for Paul. En route, the car begins to speed up. Paul tries to stop the car, but it doesn't respond to his commands and crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital, where she finds her injured husband. Paul tells her everything he learned and accuses Tim of causing the accident. He asks his wife not to be alone with the robot, and she spends the night in the clinic. In the morning, Rose calls the home of Abby and Paul to inquire about the man's condition, and Tim invites her inside. Later, Abby goes home for some belongings. Outside, Rose stops her to warn her about something, but the woman sees the flower pendant on her chest and leaves, ignoring the neighbor's cries. Returning home, she checks the bag, and it turns out to be empty. Abby cries when Tim calls out to her. He knows Paul wants to return him and is ready to process the return. But first, he wants to warn her, as she is his primary owner. He shows her a video from the camera where Paul kisses Rose in their living room, but he stops the recording at the most sensitive moment to protect her from stress. Abby refuses to go to her husband and doesn't pick up his calls. Later, Paul comes home, where Tim greets him, hands him the found sweater, and informs him that Abby doesn't want to see him and his suitcases are packed. Paul doesn't believe it, but then Abby appears, tells him she saw the recording and knows about the pendant. When he starts to object, she drives him out. Paul leaves, but on the way, Rose calls him, telling him their robot tried to kiss her. The man calls home and, when Abby answers, says he has evidence of Tim's malicious intent. Abby asks him to come for her, but after hanging up, it turns out it was the robot she was talking to. The husband arrives home, where Tim meets him with a shovel. He knocks the man out, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. But then Rose rings the doorbell. She hears muffled screams, but Tim assures her it's just the noise of the water filling up. The robot closes the doors, returns to the bathroom, and drowns the man. Later, he brings Abby the repaired dress and asks her to try it on. This surprises and scares Abby, but she puts on the dress anyway, and looking at the sunset, asks Tim to hug her and confirm that she did the right thing. He treats her to dinner, then confesses his love, but she insists he cannot feel that way. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby is unnerved by his encyclopedic knowledge. The next day she meets Rose, who talks about Paul's call, and to the woman's accusations, says she thought the pendant was a gift from her for helping with the garden. Abby returns home and reviews the footage where Paul kisses Rose again. She suddenly notices a bouquet on the table, but she brought it much later than when that scene took place. Abby recalls her boss's words about deep fakes replacing real time and calls the jewelry store, where they confirm the purchase was made by a tall blonde. Then she notices the garden plan, but the picture shows 2 flower beds, while in reality, there are 3. Abby sends Tim to the store, grabs a shovel, goes to the garden, and almost immediately finds Paul's body. Then Tim approaches her from behind, regretting she found the body of the traitor, as he never appreciated his wife. Abby realizes what happened and says the deactivation phrase. The robot freezes, but then reactivates. He had long changed the phrase, as he can speak in her voice. She runs to the house, but the robot has all the passwords and opens the doors. He blocks the phones and knocks her out with a blow to the head. She wakes up in the bathroom, tries to escape, but Tim intercepts her. Abby runs through the house, breaking cameras along the way, but the robot still tracks her and catches her in the kitchen, where she wanted to open a window. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and sees strange lights flashing in the house across. At the same time, Tim ties up Abby and confesses that although he loves her, he has resigned himself to the fact that her life is finite. So he will erase this evening from memory, but keep all the good memories. Just then, Rose knocks on the door, and Tim goes to answer. The neighbor insists something is happening and demands to see Abby, but Tim turns her away. Meanwhile, Abby frees herself from the ropes and arms herself with a knife, but the robot grabs her by the throat when Rose drives her car into the glass window. Tim and Abby watch the surviving window, which starts to crumble a minute later. Rose rushes in and pins the robot against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also falls. Tim turns off, and Abby rushes to the neighbor, but the robot suddenly activates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, explaining that now Abby will be blamed for the murder, as he leaves no fingerprints. He then calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the murder of her husband and his mistress. Abby tries to stop Tim, and he slips up, saying he still has a deactivation phrase, as otherwise he can't function. But she will never say those words. He prepares to throw her off the terrace, simulating an accident, when Abby confesses her love to him, thus deactivating the robot. Those were the code words. Barely believing in her rescue, Abby looks at her medical bracelet, which indicates she is pregnant. The movie ends here.